2 centuries before the rise of Rome as a Mediterranean empire, another vast dominion stretched from the Aegean Sea to the mountains of Afghanistan. It was a state born not from a single nation, but from the fragmentation of one man's conquests, Alexander the Great. Out of the chaos that followed his death, one of his generals carved out a realm that would link Greek and Persian worlds, rule millions, and leave behind cities whose names still echo across the Middle East. This is the story of the Seleucid Empire, an empire both ambitious and fragile. When Alexander the Great died in the city of Babylon in the year 323 BCE, he left behind not a stable kingdom, but a vast and uncertain inheritance. His conquests had stretched from Greece to Egypt and as far east as India, but his sudden death at just 32 years old ended any clear line of command. The empire he built was a patchwork of cultures and armies held together by his charisma and the promise of his leadership. With that unifying figure gone, the question became immediate and dangerous. Who would rule the world he had conquered? The days following Alexander's death were filled with confusion and tension. His generals, the men who had marched beside him for more than a decade, gathered in Babylon to decide what to do next. These men were known later as the diadochi, a Greek word meaning successors. They were all experienced commanders and administrators, each with loyal soldiers and ambitions of his own. Among them were Perdiccas, Alexander's cavalry commander and chief bodyguard; Ptolemy, who had served as one of his most trusted friends; Antipater, the regent of Macedonia; Antigonus Monophthalmus, a talented and forceful general known as the One-Eyed; and a man who would later found a dynasty, Seleucus, the son of Antiochus from Macedonia. The first order of business was succession. Alexander had left no adult heir. His wife Roxana was pregnant, and his half-brother Aridaeus was alive but mentally unfit to rule. In a tense meeting known as the Babylon Settlement, the generals agreed to a temporary compromise. Aridaeus would become king as Philip III, and Roxana's unborn child, if male, would one day rule alongside him. Until that time, the generals would govern Alexander's territories in his name. It was a fragile peace built on mistrust. Seleucus, at this early stage, did not yet command a large province. He was appointed to a high-ranking position as commander of the companion cavalry, serving under Perdiccas, who took the role of regent for the royal family. Perdiccas sought to maintain unity under his control, but many of the other generals already doubted him. His authority came not from a shared vision, but from immediate necessity, and that would not last long. The Babylon settlement also divided the empire into administrative regions, assigning governors, called satraps, to manage them. These regions largely followed the lines of the old Persian Empire, which Alexander had conquered. Antipater retained control over Macedonia and Greece. Ptolemy received Egypt. Antigonus took much of Asia Minor, and others were distributed territories across the empire's sprawling landscape. The eastern provinces of Persia and beyond were handed to commanders who were often more loyal to themselves than to any distant ruler in Babylon. This arrangement looked stable on paper, but it was an illusion. The men who had once served under Alexander now viewed themselves as potential kings. Within a few years, almost every one of them would go to war against the others, beginning the long series of conflicts known as the Wars of the Diadochi. The unity of Alexander's empire was already unraveling before his body was even buried. Seleucus, though not yet a major player, had already shown qualities that would define his later career: patience, pragmatism, and the ability to survive political storms. He had been close to Alexander since the great campaigns in the East and was known for his discipline and loyalty. Yet, in the chaos after Babylon, loyalty could become a liability. Perdiccas, suspicious of his fellow generals, began acting like a monarch in all but name. He planned to marry Alexander's sister Cleopatra, a move that many saw as an attempt to claim royal legitimacy for himself. This ambition alarmed the other diadochi. Ptolemy in Egypt was especially wary. When Perdiccas ordered the transfer of Alexander's body to Macedonia, Ptolemy intercepted the funeral procession and brought the embalmed remains to Egypt instead. It was a symbolic act, turning Alexander's tomb into a prize of legitimacy. By controlling the hero's resting place, Ptolemy could claim to guard his legacy. Perdiccas reacted with fury and prepared for war against Ptolemy. Seleucus, serving as one of his officers, marched with the royal army toward Egypt in the year 321 BCE. But the campaign went poorly. The army struggled in the harsh desert terrain, supply lines broke down, and morale collapsed. When Perdiccas's leadership failed, his officers turned against him. During a chaotic mutiny, he was killed. Some sources say by his own bodyguards, among them Seleucus himself. With Perdiccas dead, the coalition of generals met again to reorganize authority. This time they gathered at Triparadisos in Syria. Later in 321 BCE, Antipater, the elder statesman of the group, was appointed as the new regent. Seleucus, rewarded for his part in the rebellion, received the satrapy of Babylonia, a critical and wealthy province in the heart of Mesopotamia. It was a modest domain compared to the ambitions of others, but strategically it was priceless. Controlling Babylon meant controlling the center of the empire. Seleucus arrived in Babylon to take command in a region that had seen decades of upheaval. The city itself, one of the oldest and grandest in the world, had served as a capital for empires long before Alexander. It sat on the Euphrates River, connecting trade routes between the Mediterranean and the East. Its priests, scribes, and merchants maintained traditions stretching back to the Assyrians and Babylonians. Now, they would find themselves under Macedonian rule again, this time with Seleucus as their governor. For Seleucus, establishing authority in Babylon required more than military power. He needed to earn the cooperation of the local elite, who had grown accustomed to autonomy under Persian rule. He also needed to manage the Macedonian and Greek settlers who had followed Alexander's armies and now lived in colonies scattered across Mesopotamia. Balancing these diverse interests was no small task. Seleucus seems to have succeeded by respecting local traditions and restoring a measure of order. Ancient records from Babylon describe his entry into the city without bloodshed, suggesting that his arrival was welcomed or at least accepted. But the peace was temporary. Antigonus Monophthalmus, who controlled most of Asia Minor, soon began to extend his influence eastward, aiming to bring the whole of Alexander's Asian territories under his rule. This expansion threatened Seleucus's position directly. At first, Seleucus cooperated with Antigonus, but their relationship quickly soured. Antigonus demanded reports and taxes from all satraps, acting increasingly like an independent king. Seleucus resisted. The conflict came to a head around 316 BCE, when Antigonus summoned Seleucus to account for his administration. Sensing danger, Seleucus fled Babylon by night and sought refuge with Ptolemy in Egypt. This was the first major turning point in Seleucus's life. In just a few years, he had gone from a cavalry officer to the ruler of Babylon, and now to an exile. Yet, as history would show, exile did not end his career. It became the beginning of a new one. In Egypt, Ptolemy welcomed Seleucus and gave him command of troops. Ptolemy, always eager to weaken Antigonus, saw in Seleucus a valuable ally who knew the eastern provinces well. For the next several years, the balance of power among the diadochi continued to shift. Antigonus dominated much of Asia and declared himself king, prompting the others to do the same. The fragile idea of a united empire under Alexander's heirs was finished. In its place stood competing kingdoms: Ptolemaic Egypt, Antigonid Asia Minor, Cassander's Macedonia, and the eastern territories that would soon form the Seleucid Empire. Seleucus's moment came in the year 312 BCE. With Ptolemy's support, he led a small but determined force eastward from Syria into Mesopotamia. The campaign, known as the Babylonian War, was swift and decisive. Seleucus defeated Antigonus's local commanders and re-entered Babylon as both liberator and conqueror. This victory marked the true beginning of the Seleucid dynasty. When Seleucus returned to Babylon in the year 312 BCE, He was no longer a displaced satrap seeking refuge in Egypt. He was a commander with purpose. His comeback marked the start of a long campaign to secure the eastern heartlands of Alexander's former empire. The years that followed would test his resilience, his strategic mind, and his ability to build alliances amid a world of shifting loyalties. Over the next decade, he would move from local governor to a power capable of shaping the entire Hellenistic world. Seleucus's return to Babylon was both daring and symbolic. The city had changed hands several times during the struggles of the diadochi, and its loyalty could not be assumed. When Seleucus entered, he had only a few thousand troops at his back, many of them supplied by Ptolemy. But his understanding of the region and his reputation as a fair administrator helped him quickly re-establish control. Ancient Babylonian records, preserved in cuneiform, describe the event in administrative detail, noting the arrival of Seleucus and the reorganization of temple lands. These local accounts confirm that the new ruler took care to restore normal order rather than plunder the city, a choice that helped win support among the Babylonian elite. From this point onward, Seleucus's political situation was precarious. His control depended not only on his ability to defend the province, but also on how he could position himself among the other successor kings. Antigonus Monophthalmus, the most powerful of the diadochi, was determined to bring the eastern territories under his authority. Antigonus's vast holdings stretched from Asia Minor to Syria, and his armies were among the largest in the Hellenistic world. Seleucus knew that to survive, he needed both a strong military defense and careful diplomacy. The first years after his return were spent consolidating Mesopotamia. Seleucus reorganized the administration, strengthening the tax system and securing trade routes along the Tigris and Euphrates. He also re-established relations with local temple institutions, whose priests controlled both wealth and influence. His rule balanced Greek military power with local traditions, a pattern that would define the Seleucid style of governance for generations. Babylon and other Mesopotamian cities once again became centers of administration and culture, bridging the Hellenic and Mesopotamian worlds. Antigonus, however, did not tolerate independent satraps. By around 310 BCE, he sent his son, Demetrius the Besieger, to assert control over the region. Demetrius was known for his charisma and bold tactics, but his attention was divided between campaigns in Greece and the eastern provinces. Seleucus took advantage of this distraction, building alliances with local rulers and recruiting troops from the eastern satrapies. He also secured the loyalty of regions stretching toward Media and Susiana, using both diplomacy and force when necessary. Over the following years, Seleucus pushed eastward, following the routes Alexander had once taken. He marched through Media, Persis, and Parthia, gradually reclaiming territories that had fallen into uncertainty since Alexander's death. His strategy was careful. Rather than relying solely on conquest, he often reinstated local governors who pledged loyalty to him. In doing so, he recreated a version of the old Persian administrative network, now under Macedonian authority. By around 308 BCE, Seleucus's position was stronger than ever, but Antigonus still loomed as a threat. In the west, Antigonus had begun styling himself as king, a move quickly imitated by the other diadochi. Ptolemy in Egypt, Cassander in Macedonia, and Lysimachus in Thrace each took the royal title as well. Seleucus followed suit, declaring himself king over his domains in the east. This was not just a symbolic gesture. It marked the final end of the fiction that Alexander's empire was united. The diadochi were now kings in their own right, each ruling separate realms born from the same imperial carcass. Seleucus's next challenge was to define the boundaries of his kingdom. While he controlled much of Mesopotamia and Iran, the distant eastern provinces beyond the Hindu Kush had grown semi-independent. Yet Seleucus, perhaps more than any of his contemporaries, understood the value of controlling the routes to India and Central Asia. Those lands were vital for trade, wealth, and access to war elephants, the most powerful battlefield weapons of the Hellenistic age. In the late 300 single digits BCE, Seleucus turned east once again. His goal was to restore control over the frontier regions that Alexander had once conquered but never fully integrated. Among these was the territory of the Mauryan Empire, which had risen in India under the rule of Chandragupta Maurya. Alexander's brief incursion into the Punjab decades earlier had left behind a fragile network of Greek garrisons. Now, those outposts had been absorbed by the Mauryan state, which extended across northern India and into parts of what is now Afghanistan. Seleucus crossed into India, but rather than engaging in prolonged warfare, he chose diplomacy. Around 303 BCE, the two rulers concluded a treaty. Seleucus ceded territories in the Indus Valley to Chandragupta in exchange for 500 war elephants and a lasting peace. This exchange proved wise. The elephants became a decisive advantage in future battles, while the stable eastern border allowed Seleucus to focus on the western front. The peace with Chandragupta also symbolized a broader principle of Seleucid rule. Negotiation could achieve what endless campaigns could not. It reflected the pragmatism that would help his dynasty endure even amid constant warfare. Having secured the east, Seleucus turned his attention back toward the west, where the balance of power among the diadochi had shifted again. Antigonus was still the most dominant figure, but he now faced a coalition of rivals: Ptolemy in Egypt, Cassander in Macedonia, and Lysimachus in Thrace, all wary of his ambition. Seleucus, recognizing an opportunity, joined this alliance. The coalition's shared goal was simple: to end Antigonus's attempt to reunify Alexander's empire under his rule. In 301 BCE, the rivals finally clashed in one of the defining battles of the Hellenistic period, the Battle of Ipsus, fought in Central Asia Minor. Seleucus marched west with his army, bringing his newly acquired Indian war elephants, which would play a decisive role. The coalition forces, led by Seleucus and Lysimachus, faced Antigonus and his son Demetrius. The battle was massive, involving tens of thousands of soldiers and hundreds of cavalry on each side. Ancient historians such as Diodorus and Plutarch describe how the elephants, brought all the way from India, became the key to victory. Seleucus deployed them to block Demetrius' cavalry, preventing them from returning to aid Antigonus's main line. Cut off and overwhelmed, Antigonus was struck down in battle, ending his dream of empire. The victory at Ipsus was a turning point. It confirmed Seleucus as one of the foremost kings of the Hellenistic world. In the aftermath, the victors divided Antigonus's territories among themselves. Seleucus gained much of Syria and parts of Asia Minor, expanding his kingdom to its greatest extent yet. Ptolemy kept Egypt, Cassander remained in control of Macedonia, and Lysimachus consolidated Thrace. The world of Alexander had now resolved into distinct and rival empires. Seleucus's empire, at this stage, stretched farther than any other successors. It included Mesopotamia, Persia, parts of Anatolia, and the eastern satrapies reaching toward the Indus. His control over trade routes between the Mediterranean and India made his state immensely wealthy. Yet this vastness also posed a challenge. Governing such a sprawling territory required both strong administration and a network of cities to project royal authority. Seleucus understood this well. In the years following Ipsus, he began an ambitious program of city founding. Among these were Seleucia on the Tigris, which replaced Babylon as his administrative capital, and Antioch on the Orontes, which would later serve as the main capital of the Seleucid dynasty. These cities were designed not only as military centers but also as symbols of a new Hellenistic identity. Places where Greek settlers, local inhabitants, and Eastern cultures could interact under the framework of royal authority. The cities served as administrative hubs, markets, and cultural crossroads. They also carried the names of the royal family, reinforcing the dynasty's prestige across its territories. Seleucus's reputation as a ruler grew alongside his realm. Ancient sources describe him as fair-minded, disciplined, and deeply strategic. He earned the title Nicator, meaning the victorious, for his consistent success in consolidating and expanding his domain. Yet even at the height of his power, Seleucus remained cautious. He understood that the alliances among the successor kings were temporary, held together only by mutual fear and convenience. After the death of Cassander in Macedonia, the balance once again began to shift. Lysimachus, once an ally, became a rival as both men sought to control Asia Minor. In the closing years of his life, Seleucus prepared to extend his rule even further. Around 281 BCE, he faced Lysimachus in battle at Corupedion in western Asia Minor. The confrontation was fierce but brief. Seleucus emerged victorious, and Lysimachus was killed. With this triumph, Seleucus effectively became master of nearly all the lands once ruled by Alexander, except for Egypt, which remained under Ptolemaic control. When Seleucus the Victorious fell to assassination in the year 281 BCE, his empire stretched from the Aegean coast of Asia Minor to the foothills of India. It was the largest of all the Hellenistic realms and perhaps the most complex. Yet with his death came a pressing challenge: how to hold together a state so vast, diverse, and recently formed. Into this situation stepped his son, Antiochus I Soter, a man raised amid both Macedonian tradition and the realities of governing an Eastern empire. Before examining his reign, however, it is important to understand the framework that Seleucus left behind, the structures, policies, and ambitions that transformed conquest into a functioning empire. Seleucus had not simply inherited land, he had constructed an administrative world. His approach to empire building differed from that of his contemporaries, emphasizing durable governance over personal glory. He had learned from the collapse of earlier Macedonian unity that no single ruler could personally oversee such an expanse. Instead, he relied on networks of cities, loyal governors, and negotiated local autonomy to bind the empire together. The Seleucid state, in essence, was both Greek and Asian, both centralized and regional. This balance became the secret of its early endurance. At the heart of Seleucus's vision was the city. During his rule, he founded or refounded numerous urban centers across his territories, some ancient, others entirely new. These were not random acts of colonization, but deliberate instruments of control and cultural integration. Among the most famous were Seleucia on the Tigris and Antioch on the Orontes, along with others like Apamea and Laodicea. Each city served a strategic and administrative purpose, linking trade routes, housing loyal military settlers, and projecting royal presence into distant regions. Seleucia on the Tigris, established to replace Babylon as the empire's eastern capital, embodied this policy perfectly. Babylon, though ancient and revered, was also deeply tied to its native priesthoods and traditional administration. Seleucus, perhaps aware of the difficulties of controlling such an old and independent city, chose to build anew. Seleucia became a planned Greek-style city with wide streets, colonnaded avenues, and a mixed population of Greeks, Macedonians, and locals. It became both a symbol of royal authority and a hub of east-west trade. Its location, near the junction of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, allowed it to dominate the commercial and logistical networks that had sustained Mesopotamian civilization for millennia. Further west, Antioch on the Orontes played a parallel role in Syria. Founded as a new royal capital closer to the Mediterranean, it was positioned at the crossroads of trade routes linking Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. Antioch would grow into one of the great cities of the ancient world, rivaling Alexandria and later serving as a major center under the Romans. Seleucus named it after his father, Antiochus, linking personal devotion with dynastic propaganda. The same principle guided other city foundations. Apamea honored his wife, Apama, a noblewoman from Sogdiana who represented the empire's eastern connections. Laodicea commemorated his mother, Laodice. Through such acts, Seleucus used urban planning to express both political control and family legacy. These cities also functioned as garrisons. The settlers, largely Macedonian veterans and Greek colonists, were granted land and privileges in exchange for military service. This network of military colonies allowed the Seleucids to maintain a rapid response force across their far-flung territories without relying entirely on local levies. The arrangement resembled, in some ways, the Persian model of satrapal defense, but infused with Hellenistic civic organization. Soldiers and civilians coexisted in a structured environment that promoted both loyalty and stability. Seleucus's empire, however, was not bound by cities alone. Its cohesion also depended on borders carefully negotiated with other powers. The most famous of these diplomatic efforts was his agreement with Chandragupta Maurya, the founder of the Mauryan Empire in India. This episode, briefly mentioned earlier, deserves closer attention because it reveals the pragmatic and far-sighted nature of Seleucus's rule. After Alexander's death, the easternmost satrapies in Bactria and the Indus Valley had been left in confusion. Macedonian garrisons were isolated, and local resistance movements rose against them. By the time Seleucus sought to reclaim these regions, Chandragupta had already united much of northern India and was expanding westward. The two rulers met in a confrontation that, instead of devolving into extended warfare, ended in negotiation. Seleucus ceded the territories of Arachosia, Gedrosia, and parts of the Indus Valley, regions difficult to govern from Mesopotamia, in exchange for peace and a remarkable gift: 500 Indian war elephants. This exchange proved to be one of the most consequential diplomatic decisions of the Hellenistic age. The elephants, enormous and psychologically intimidating on the battlefield, became an integral part of Seleucus's army. They played a decisive role at the Battle of Ipsus, where they helped secure his victory over Antiochus the One-Eyed. The Mauryan alliance also established a precedent for peaceful coexistence between the Greek world and the Indian subcontinent. Both sides gained. Chandragupta secured his western frontier and recognition from a major Hellenistic monarch, while Seleucus gained invaluable military assets and stable borders. The arrangement was likely formalized by the dispatch of ambassadors, among them Megasthenes, who resided at the Mauryan court and later wrote the Indica, one of the earliest Greek accounts of India. Through such diplomacy, Seleucus extended his influence without overextending his resources. His empire's shape, stretching along the old Persian royal road and the great river valleys, reflected this calculated pragmatism. The east was secured by treaty, the west by alliance and fortification. Trade flourished under this stability. Spices, gems, and silk from India traveled through Seleucid territory to reach the Mediterranean, while Greek goods and artisans moved eastward. The empire thus stood at the center of an emerging global economy, linking cultures across thousands of miles. Seleucus's economic and administrative policies aimed to integrate this vast diversity. He retained much of the Achaemenid Persian bureaucratic system, using local officials and scribes who knew the languages and customs of their regions. The royal administration operated in both Greek and Aramaic, ensuring communication between Macedonian governors and native populations. Taxation followed the Persian model. Satrapies contributed tribute based on agricultural output and trade revenues. Seleucus also maintained the royal road network and built new infrastructure, allowing armies and merchants to move quickly between provinces. This combination of Greek urbanism and Persian administration created a durable foundation that his successors would inherit. Despite these achievements, Seleucus's reign was not free from tension. The challenge of ruling over multiple cultures was constant. In regions like Iran and Mesopotamia, Greek settlers lived alongside local populations with ancient traditions of temple authority and civic autonomy. Seleucus's approach was generally one of inclusion rather than suppression. He promoted intermarriage between Greek and local elites, following the example of Alexander, and incorporated Persian and Babylonian symbols into his royal imagery. Coins struck during his reign show a blend of Greek and Eastern motifs, Zeus seated on a throne, but styled in a manner reminiscent of Persian royal iconography. This synthesis reflected the dual nature of his rule, Greek in language and form, but imperial in scope and character. Seleucus also cultivated his image as a legitimate heir of Alexander. He emphasized continuity with the conqueror's achievements while subtly redefining them. Where Alexander had been a charismatic conqueror, Seleucus presented himself as a stabilizing monarch, a builder of cities, protector of peoples, and restorer of order. His titles often carried religious overtones, invoking divine favor without claiming divinity outright. This careful balance of authority and modesty distinguished him from other Hellenistic rulers who pursued more overt godlike status. As the empire expanded, Seleucus had to manage relations with other powers on his western frontier. The alliance with Ptolemy and Egypt, which had once secured his position, began to fray. Both kings now eyed Syria and the eastern Mediterranean, regions of immense strategic value. Seleucus's founding of Antioch can be seen partly as preparation for future conflict, a secure base of operations facing Egypt and the Aegean. Although open war did not break out during his lifetime, the seeds of rivalry were planted. These tensions would define Seleucid foreign policy for generations. Seleucus's final years were devoted to consolidating his achievements and planning for dynastic continuity. His son, Antiochus, had already been involved in governance and military campaigns, ensuring a smooth succession. The empire was prosperous and secure, its administration functioning effectively, and its trade routes active. Yet the very vastness of Seleucus's creation contained the seeds of future difficulty. Managing communication, enforcing loyalty, and maintaining unity across such distances would test even the most capable rulers. When Seleucus the Victorious was struck down at the height of his power in the year 281 BCE, the weight of the empire he had built passed to his son, Antiochus I Soter. The new king inherited not just the largest Hellenistic realm, but one of the most complex political systems the ancient world had ever known. The territories stretched from the mountains of Thrace to the borders of India, uniting Greek settlers, Persian nobles, and countless local communities under a single crown. Antiochus' task was not to expand further, at least not yet, but to secure what his father had achieved. The age of founding and conquest was over. The age of administration and defense had begun. Antiochus I was born to Seleucus and Apama, a Sogdian noblewoman from Central Asia whom Seleucus had married during Alexander's campaigns. This mixed heritage gave Antiochus a symbolic connection to both the Macedonian and Eastern traditions of the empire. He had been groomed for leadership from an early age, sharing command responsibilities during his father's lifetime and serving as co-ruler over the eastern provinces. His title, Soter, meaning savior, would later commemorate not only his victories, but his role in preserving the unity of a fragile empire after the founder's sudden death. The early years of Antiochus' reign were dominated by the need to maintain control over an empire whose stability depended on personal loyalty to Seleucus. With the founder gone, many regional governors, especially in Asia Minor, tested the limits of royal authority. The same was true in the eastern provinces, where distance and local power structures had always limited the reach of the central government. Antiochus' first goal, therefore, was to secure recognition as legitimate ruler across the empire's many regions. In Babylon and the eastern satrapies, Antiochus's succession was accepted relatively smoothly. His mother's eastern heritage and his long residence in those provinces made him familiar to local elites, but the western territories, particularly Asia Minor, were less settled. There, ambitious satraps and Greek city-states saw opportunities in the power transition. The death of Lysimachus at Corupedion had left a political vacuum in Anatolia, one that invited both Seleucid and local ambitions. Antiochus would spend much of his reign navigating these frontier pressures while also managing a new and unpredictable force, the Galatians. The Galatians were Celtic tribes who had migrated into Asia Minor not long after Alexander's death. Originally mercenaries in the service of various Hellenistic rulers, they eventually carved out their own territory in the central Anatolian highlands. Their arrival introduced a new and destabilizing element into the politics of the region. These warriors, fierce and mobile, raided Greek cities and demanded tribute from local rulers. For Antiochus, their presence was both a challenge and an opportunity. How he handled them would define his reign and earn him his epithet, Soter. Before confronting the Galatians, Antiochus had to address another pressing matter: relations with Macedonia and Egypt. The balance of power among the successor kingdoms had shifted once again. In Macedonia, the Antigonid dynasty had re-established itself under Antiochus II Gonatas, who sought to restore Macedonian influence in the Aegean. In Egypt, Ptolemy II Philadelphus ruled a powerful maritime empire, controlling Cyprus, the Aegean islands, and much of the eastern Mediterranean trade. The Seleucid Empire, caught between these powers, faced the challenge of defending long borders on multiple fronts. Antiochus chose diplomacy over aggression. He confirmed peace with Egypt, allowing trade and communication between the two empires to continue. This truce gave him time to stabilize his own territories before engaging in the rivalries that would later become the Syrian Wars. In Macedonia, relations were cautious but not hostile. Both Antiochus and Antigonus II recognized that war between them would only benefit Egypt and the smaller states of the Aegean. For a time, the Seleucid Empire enjoyed a rare moment of relative peace, which allowed Antiochus to focus inward. At home, he continued his father's policy of building and strengthening cities. He reinforced the strategic triangle of Antioch, Seleucia on the Tigris, and Apamea, creating a network of strong urban centers that linked the empire's core regions. These cities served as administrative capitals and cultural beacons, spreading Greek language and institutions across the Near East. The Seleucid policy of granting local autonomy to cities while maintaining royal oversight encouraged loyalty without crushing local traditions. Antiochus also promoted economic development, ensuring that the empire's trade routes remained active and secure. Caravans carrying spices, textiles, and precious metals passed through Seleucid lands, enriching both the royal treasury and local merchants. Despite these achievements, the western frontier remained unstable. The Galatians continued to raid coastal territories, threatening both Seleucid allies and independent Greek communities in Asia Minor. Their speed and ferocity made them difficult to contain using traditional phalanx tactics. The crisis reached a peak when the Galatians invaded regions close to the Seleucid heartland, demanding tribute from Hellenistic rulers and sacking temples. Antiochus responded with a decisive campaign that would become the defining event of his reign. According to later historians, Antiochus confronted the Galatians near the region of Phrygia. His forces included phalanxes, cavalry, and a powerful contingent of Indian war elephants inherited from his father's alliance with Chandragupta Maurya. The elephants, rarely seen by the Galatians, played a critical role in the battle. As they advanced, their sheer size and noise panicked the enemy ranks. The Galatians, unaccustomed to facing such creatures, broke formation and fled. Antiochus's army pursued them relentlessly, turning a dangerous invasion into a resounding victory. For this triumph, he was hailed as Soter, the savior, by his troops and by grateful Greek cities who saw him as the protector of civilization against barbarian incursions. The victory over the Galatians did more than secure the western frontier. It enhanced the legitimacy of the Seleucid monarchy across the empire. Antiochus used the success to reinforce his image as a divinely favored ruler. Coins and inscriptions celebrated his title, and temples were dedicated in his honor. For the first time since Seleucus's death, the empire felt united under a single, confident authority. The campaign also demonstrated the effectiveness of Seleucid military organization, a combination of traditional Macedonian formations and diverse auxiliary forces drawn from across the empire. However, Antiochus's reign was not without strain. His cautious diplomacy with Egypt eventually gave way to renewed tension. Ptolemy II, seeking to expand his influence in the eastern Mediterranean, encouraged revolts in coastal regions loyal to the Seleucids. The two empires began maneuvering for control of Syria, a region encompassing modern-day Lebanon and southern Syria. This fertile and strategic land was vital for access to trade routes and military movement between Asia and Africa. Though large-scale war did not erupt during Antiochus's lifetime, the rivalry laid the foundation for the Syrian wars that would dominate the next century. At the same time, the Seleucid court began developing its own traditions of kingship. Under Antiochus, the monarchy became more formalized and ceremonial. The king's image appeared on coins wearing the royal diadem, a symbol of divine authority. Royal festivals and processions emphasized continuity with both Macedonian and Persian traditions. The court at Antioch became a center of culture and scholarship, attracting philosophers, poets, and scientists from across the Hellenistic world. This blending of Greek and Eastern influences reflected the empire's identity, cosmopolitan yet unified under the Seleucid crown. Antiochus also continued to strengthen his control over the eastern provinces, though his attention was increasingly drawn to the west. In regions like Bactria and Parthia, Greek settlers and local dynasts maintained a degree of autonomy in exchange for loyalty and tribute. This arrangement worked while the central government was strong, but it also sowed the seeds of future independence movements. Antiochus's pragmatic approach, trusting local rulers as long as they remained cooperative, allowed him to focus on more immediate concerns, though it came at the cost of tighter control. In his later years, Antiochus faced a more personal challenge that would shape the dynasty's succession. His son, Antiochus II Theos, had been named co-ruler, mirroring the arrangement between Seleucus and himself. This system of joint kingship was designed to ensure smooth transitions and prepare heirs for leadership, but it also risked creating rival centers of authority. Fortunately, in Antiochus's case, the partnership remained stable during his lifetime, and the transfer of power after his death would proceed without civil war. By the time of his death around 261 BCE, Antiochus had transformed his father's conquests into a functioning imperial system. His reign was not marked by spectacular expansion, but by consolidation, by the creation of institutions, borders, and traditions that would define the Seleucid state for generations. His defense against the Galatians secured Asia Minor. His diplomacy kept Egypt and Macedonia at bay. His administrative reforms strengthened the heart of the empire. He proved that the Seleucid realm could survive the loss of its founder and remain a dominant power in the Hellenistic world. When Antiochus I Soter died around the year 261 BCE, the Seleucid Empire stood as one of the strongest powers in the Hellenistic world. His careful diplomacy, decisive victory over the Galatians, and internal reforms had given the empire a decade of stability after its founder's turbulent beginnings. Yet the delicate balance he had achieved could not last forever. The long rivalry with the Ptolemies of Egypt, only restrained by treaties and mutual caution, was ready to erupt once more. The man who would inherit this challenge, Antiochus II Theos, faced a landscape shaped by ambition, suspicion, and the constant tension between consolidation and expansion. Antiochus II was the son of Antiochus I and Stratonice, the daughter of Demetrius the besieger of the Antigonid line. This lineage gave him connections to multiple Hellenistic dynasties, a fact that would both aid and complicate his reign. Raised within the cosmopolitan court of Antioch, Antiochus II had been educated in the traditions of Greek learning and Eastern governance. His early appointment as co-ruler with his father had given him administrative experience, but it also exposed him to the intricate politics of the royal court, where satraps, generals, and advisors each sought to influence policy. By the time he ascended the throne, the empire's internal machinery was well established. His task was to defend and expand its borders while navigating the increasingly dangerous world of Hellenistic diplomacy. From the outset, Antiochus inherited a hostile relationship with Egypt. Ptolemy II Philadelphus, ruling from Alexandria, had spent his reign building a vast naval empire and securing economic dominance over the eastern Mediterranean. The earlier peace with Antiochus I had left unresolved disputes over Kola, Syria, a strategically vital region encompassing much of modern Lebanon and southern Syria. Control of this territory meant access to trade routes linking the Mediterranean with Mesopotamia, and both empires claimed it as their rightful possession. Beneath this territorial dispute lay a broader rivalry for prestige and influence across the Greek-speaking world. The first major confrontation between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies under Antiochus II came to be known as the Second Syrian War, fought roughly between the years 260 and 253 BCE. The causes of the war were complex but revolved around three interconnected motives: the desire to recover lost lands, to weaken a rival dynasty, and to assert dominance over the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean. For Antiochus, the war offered a chance to strengthen his legitimacy as king by reviving the aggressive expansionism of his grandfather Seleucus the Victorious. For Ptolemy II, it was an opportunity to contain the Seleucid threat and reaffirm Egypt's role as the leading power of the Hellenistic East. The war began with Seleucid offensives in Asia Minor and along the Syrian coast. Antiochus's forces were supported by a network of local allies and Greek cities resentful of Ptolemaic control. The Seleucid navy, though smaller than Egypt's, managed to secure temporary victories along the coastlines of Ionia and the Aegean. The early campaigns seemed to favor Antiochus. Egyptian garrisons were expelled from several coastal towns, and for a brief moment, the Seleucids appeared poised to regain Syria. But the balance of power quickly shifted. Ptolemy II's naval supremacy and vast financial resources turned the tide. The Egyptian fleet, operating from bases in Cyprus and the Aegean islands, disrupted Seleucid supply lines and supported rebellions among the coastal cities of Asia Minor. The Ptolemaic strategy was not merely military, but economic and diplomatic. Egypt poured money into Greek cities, hiring mercenaries and sponsoring festivals and temples, thereby cultivating loyalty through patronage rather than force. This combination of soft power and naval control undermined Antiochus's gains and gradually forced him onto the defensive. As the war dragged on, the Seleucid Empire began to show the strain of prolonged conflict. Antiochus's attention was divided between the Western Front against Egypt and the internal administration of his vast territories. Rebellions broke out in parts of Anatolia, where local rulers sought to exploit the distraction of war. In the east, the provinces of Bactria and Parthia began to act with increasing independence, their satraps testing the limits of central authority. These signs of fragmentation hinted at deeper structural weaknesses that would later haunt the dynasty. Despite these challenges, Antiochus managed to sustain the war through determination and the wealth of the Mesopotamian heartlands. His armies continued to contest control over Syria, though without decisive success. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and the shifting fortunes of the war created a stalemate. In the end, neither the Seleucids nor the Ptolemies could secure a lasting victory. After nearly a decade of inconclusive fighting, diplomacy replaced warfare. The peace that followed was sealed through a dynastic marriage, a common tool in the politics of the Hellenistic age. Antiochus II agreed to marry Berenice, the daughter of Ptolemy II. This union symbolized a temporary reconciliation between the rival houses, but it came at a personal and political cost. To make the alliance possible, Antiochus was required to repudiate his first wife, Laodice, who had long been his partner and the mother of his sons. The decision alienated a powerful faction within the Seleucid court, where Laodice and her supporters held significant influence. What appeared as a diplomatic triumph would soon turn into a dynastic tragedy. The marriage to Berenice was celebrated with great ceremony. Greek cities issued decrees in honor of the royal union, and poets praised it as a new bond between Asia and Egypt. For a brief period, peace returned to the Eastern Mediterranean. Trade resumed, cities rebuilt, and both dynasties turned their focus inward. But beneath the surface, the situation remained fragile. The peace was not born of trust, but of exhaustion. The underlying rivalries, particularly over Syria, remained unresolved. Moreover, Antiochus's dual family ties, to Laodice and to Berenice, created competing claims to the throne that would soon erupt into open conflict. When Ptolemy II died around the middle of the 3rd century BCE, the equilibrium that had held the region together collapsed. Antiochus, perhaps feeling less bound by the marriage alliance now that his father-in-law was gone, returned to Laodice and reinstated their sons as heirs. This decision triggered one of the most infamous episodes in Seleucid history. According to later historians, Laodice, fearing that Antiochus might once again abandon her for political reasons, orchestrated his death, possibly by poisoning. In the ensuing chaos, her supporters declared her son, Seleucus II Callinicus, as king, while Berenice and her infant son claimed the throne with the backing of Egypt. The result was a brief but devastating civil war known as the Laodicean War. The conflict pitted mother against stepmother and Seleucid loyalists against Egyptian interventionists. Berenice appealed to her brother, Ptolemy III Euergetes, who launched an invasion of Seleucid territory under the pretext of avenging his sister's murder. Egyptian forces advanced deep into Syria and Mesopotamia, capturing several key cities and even reaching Babylon. For a moment, the Seleucid Empire seemed on the brink of collapse. Though the Laodicean War technically began after Antiochus's death, its roots lay squarely in the policies of his reign. The fragile peace treaties, the divided loyalties, and the personal ambitions entangled with political strategy. His attempt to secure peace through marriage had instead ignited a dynastic crisis that exposed the vulnerability of the empire's foundations. The Seleucid state, still young compared to its rivals, was held together by loyalty to the ruling house. When that house fractured, so too did the empire's cohesion. In assessing Antiochus II's reign, historians see a period of both achievement and decline. On one hand, he maintained the empire's integrity through a decade of war against Egypt, demonstrating the Seleucid capacity for resilience. He continued the policies of urban development and Hellenization, fostering Greek culture in Asia Minor and the Levant. Coins from his reign display refined artistry and inscriptions emphasizing divine favor, reflecting both prosperity and royal confidence. Yet, on the other hand, his reign marked the beginning of a slow erosion of central power. The growing autonomy of eastern provinces like Bactria and Parthia, combined with dynastic instability in the royal family, hinted at fractures that would widen in the coming decades. Culturally, Antiochus presided over a vibrant court at Antioch, where Greek and Eastern traditions continued to intermingle. Philosophers, poets, and scientists found patronage, and the Seleucid administration remained a major conduit for cross-cultural exchange. Trade between the Mediterranean and Central Asia flourished, and the empire remained a central link in the network of Hellenistic commerce. In this sense, the Seleucid world under Antiochus remained one of the most cosmopolitan societies of the ancient world, an empire where Greek language and Eastern religion, Persian administration, and Macedonian military tradition coexisted. When Antiochus II Theos died in the early years of the 240s BCE, he left behind not a stable empire, but a storm of conflicting loyalties and rival claims. His reign had been defined by a decade of warfare with Egypt and the uneasy peace secured through his marriage to Berenice, the daughter of Ptolemy II Philadelphus. But that very marriage, intended to cement peace between the Seleucid and Ptolemaic dynasties, instead planted the seeds of civil war. With Antiochus's death, the delicate balance between his two families, his first wife Laodice and her sons on one side, and Berenice and her young child on the other, collapsed into a brutal struggle for power that would shake the empire to its foundations. The conflict that followed, known to history as the Laodicean War, was not simply a family feud. It was a political and military crisis that drew in nearly every major power of the Hellenistic world. At its core was the question of legitimacy. Who had the right to rule the Seleucid Empire after Antiochus's death? Laodice had been the first wife and long-standing partner of the late king, mother of his grown sons, Seleucus II Callinicus and Antiochus Hierax. Berenice, by contrast, was the younger Egyptian princess whose marriage had been arranged as part of a political treaty. When Antiochus repudiated Laodice to marry Berenice, he had effectively divided the court into two bitterly opposed factions. The events immediately following Antiochus' death unfolded with alarming speed. Laodice, who had remained in Asia Minor during the last years of her husband's reign, moved quickly to secure her position. Fearing that she or her sons might be displaced by the Egyptian alliance, she allegedly arranged the king's assassination. Ancient sources suggest poisoning, and declared her son Seleucus II as the rightful king. Her faction in the court, composed of many veteran officials and nobles loyal to her family, proclaimed the succession in Ephesus, one of the most important cities of Western Asia Minor. At the same time, supporters of Berenice, backed by Egyptian influence, announced that her infant son, also named Antiochus, was the legitimate heir, representing the union of the Seleucid and Ptolemaic houses. This dual proclamation created immediate chaos. Two rival courts emerged, one centered in Asia Minor under Laodice and her son, and another in Antioch under Berenice and her Egyptian advisors. For the Ptolemies, this was not just a dynastic issue, it was a matter of foreign policy. Berenice's brother, Ptolemy III Euergetes, had just ascended the Egyptian throne following his father's death. He now saw an opportunity to expand his empire and avenge what he considered a personal insult to his family. When news arrived that Berenice and her son were threatened in Antioch, Ptolemy launched one of the most ambitious military campaigns of his time. Ptolemy's invasion of the Seleucid Empire began around the year 246 BCE. Marching north from Egypt, his forces advanced rapidly through the Levant, seizing Syria, Phoenicia, and large parts of Cilicia. The Egyptian army met little resistance at first, as much of the Seleucid administration was still paralyzed by the succession crisis. In some cities, local governors and Greek settlers welcomed Ptolemy as a liberator, preferring his stable rule to the uncertainty of a divided Seleucid monarchy. Ptolemy himself moved swiftly into Syria and even as far as Mesopotamia, reportedly reaching Babylon, a feat that no Egyptian army had achieved since the days of the pharaohs. Meanwhile, tragedy struck in Antioch. Berenice and her young son, who might have served as symbols of reconciliation, were captured and executed by Laodice's supporters before Ptolemy could reach them. Their deaths provided Ptolemy with both a moral and political justification for his invasion. He declared himself the avenger of his murdered sister and nephew, a champion of justice against Seleucid treachery. Egyptian propaganda of the time portrayed Laodice as a murderous usurper, while Ptolemy cast his intervention as a divine mission sanctioned by the gods. For the Seleucid state, the situation was catastrophic. The empire, already stretched thin across vast territories, now faced invasion from the southwest and internal division within its own ruling family. Seleucus II, though still young and inexperienced, rallied loyal forces in Asia Minor and Mesopotamia. His position was precarious. While he held the eastern heartlands of the empire, his authority in the western provinces was contested. To secure his reign, he was forced to rely heavily on regional governors and local elites, granting them greater autonomy in exchange for military support. This decentralization, while necessary for survival, weakened the unity of the empire in the long term. The war soon spread across multiple fronts. In Asia Minor, Seleucus' forces struggled to contain revolts and repel Egyptian advances. In Syria, Ptolemy's armies captured key coastal cities, including Seleucia Pieria, the port that served as the gateway to Antioch. Control of these maritime bases allowed Egypt to dominate the eastern Mediterranean and cut off Seleucid access to the sea. Further east, local rebellions erupted in the wake of the instability, particularly in Media and Parthia. Although these revolts were small at first, they revealed the fragility of Seleucid authority outside the immediate centers of power. Yet despite his early successes, Ptolemy's campaign eventually overextended itself. The sheer size of the Seleucid Empire made occupation difficult, and logistical challenges mounted as the Egyptian army moved farther from its bases in the Nile Delta. The Mesopotamian climate and long supply routes drained resources, while resistance from local populations and Seleucid loyalists increased. After a few years of campaigning, Ptolemy withdrew much of his army to Egypt, taking with him vast amounts of treasure, artworks, and temple goods. Ancient writers claim that he returned with thousands of sacred statues and relics that the Persians had once seized centuries earlier, restoring them triumphantly to Egyptian temples. a gesture that earned him the epithet Euergetes, meaning benefactor. Seleucus II emerged from the war battered but not destroyed. Though he had lost Syria and much of the empire's western coastline to Egypt, he managed to retain the core territories of Mesopotamia, Persia, and parts of Anatolia. The war had confirmed Egypt's naval supremacy, but had not eliminated the Seleucid state. In the aftermath, Seleucus turned his attention to rebuilding internal stability and suppressing rival claimants, chief among them his own brother, Antiochus Hierax. The rivalry between Seleucus and Hierax was the second phase of the Seleucid dynastic crisis. Hierax, whose name means the hawk, had been granted control over parts of Asia Minor as a subordinate ruler, but he soon declared independence, supported by his ambitious mother, Laodice. The result was a fratricidal conflict that drained the empire's resources and divided its loyalties even further. Greek cities in Anatolia, weary of Seleucid authority, often sided with Hierax, while the Galatian tribes, always eager for plunder, sold their services to both sides. The war between the brothers raged for years, turning Asia Minor into a patchwork of competing kingdoms and mercenary forces. Eventually, Hierax was defeated and fled to Thrace, where he died in exile. But by then, the damage was done. The once unified western provinces had been fractured beyond repair. Throughout this period, the Seleucid monarchy survived largely because of its institutional resilience. The bureaucracy established by Seleucus the Victorious continued to function in the eastern provinces, where governors, satraps, and temple administrators maintained order and tax collection. The royal treasury at Seleucia on the Tigris remained a vital source of revenue, allowing Seleucus II to fund his armies and assert limited control even amid chaos. However, the loss of the rich Syrian and coastal regions severely weakened the empire's finances and reduced its access to Mediterranean trade. The Laodicean War also reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the Hellenistic world. Egypt emerged as the dominant naval and commercial power, while the Seleucids shifted their focus increasingly eastward. The political fragmentation of Asia Minor opened opportunities for smaller states like Pergamon, which began to rise under the leadership of the Attalid dynasty. The balance of power that had defined the earlier generation of Alexander's successors gave way to a more complex and unstable system of regional rivalries. Culturally, the period of turmoil left deep marks on the Seleucid world. Inscriptions and coinage from the era reveal efforts to reinforce royal legitimacy through religious symbolism. Seleucus II emphasized his divine ancestry and presented himself as a protector of the cities and temples harmed during the wars. Yet the contradictions of his rule were evident. The king who claimed to be guardian of order presided over an empire in which autonomy, rebellion, and foreign invasion had become routine. The Seleucid vision of unity, a kingdom linking the Greek and Eastern worlds, was beginning to fray under the weight of dynastic division and external pressure. By the time the Laodicean War ended, probably in the early 240s BCE, both the Seleucid and Ptolemaic empires were exhausted. A formal peace was concluded, leaving Egypt in possession of Syria and several key coastal territories, while the Seleucids retained their eastern heartland. The war had no clear victor, only survivors. For the Seleucids, the immediate crisis was over, but the consequences of the conflict would echo for generations. The empire's western frontier was permanently weakened, its economy disrupted, and its dynasty stained by bloodshed. By the middle decades of the 3rd century BCE, the Seleucid Empire stood at a crossroads. The dynastic chaos of the Laodicean War had left scars that ran deep into its political structure. While the royal house struggled to restore stability in the western provinces, the empire's vast eastern territories, rich, remote, and essential to its wealth, were slipping quietly out of control. In regions like Bactria and Parthia, distance from the royal court and the growing independence of local governors began to erode central authority. What started as neglect would soon evolve into secession, creating two new powers that forever changed the political map of Asia. the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom, and the Parthian Empire. To understand how these regions broke away, one must first consider the geography and administration of the Seleucid realm. From the beginning, Seleucid kings had inherited a problem that no amount of military power could fully solve. The empire was simply too vast. Stretching from the Aegean coast to the borders of India, its communication lines spanned thousands of miles. Even with the old Persian road systems and newly founded cities serving as administrative hubs, messages could take months to travel between Antioch in the west and Bactria in the east. This physical distance meant that eastern satraps often ruled with substantial autonomy. They collected taxes, commanded armies, and managed diplomacy with local tribes and neighbors. When the central government was strong, this autonomy worked to mutual advantage. When it weakened, it became the seedbed of independence. The eastern provinces of Bactria and Parthia were not peripheral wastelands. They were among the most valuable regions of the empire. Bactria, located along the upper reaches of the Oxus River, was a land of fertile plains, thriving cities, and vibrant trade routes connecting Persia, India, and the steppe world beyond. It had been a center of Persian power before Alexander's conquest and retained deep traditions of governance and urban life. Greek and Macedonian settlers had transformed its capital, Bactra, modern Balkh, into a major Hellenistic city. Temples, theaters, and marketplaces stood beside ancient ziggurats, symbolizing the blend of Greek and local cultures that characterized the region. Bactria's prosperity came from its agriculture, crafts, and its position as a crossroads of commerce, especially in gold, lapis lazuli, and horses. Parthia, by contrast, was a more rugged and frontier-like province, located southeast of the Caspian Sea. Its terrain of mountains and deserts made it harder to control, but also easier to defend. The people of Parthia were a mix of Iranian tribes, semi-nomadic and fiercely independent. The Seleucids maintained garrisons there, but their presence was often more symbolic than substantial. Parthia's strategic value lay in its role as a buffer zone between the empire and the nomadic peoples of Central Asia. Whoever controlled Parthia controlled the northeastern gateway of Iran. During the reign of Seleucus II Callinicus, the empire's energies were consumed by internal strife and the ongoing rivalry with Egypt. The central government's ability to project authority across its vast territory was severely weakened. This neglect created opportunities for ambitious satraps in the east. In Bactria, the satrap Diadochi, a Greek of Macedonian descent, began to act with increasing independence. Initially, his defiance took subtle forms, minting coins in his own name, negotiating directly with local tribes, and strengthening the province's defenses without seeking royal approval. These actions were still nominally loyal. Diadochi continued to recognize Seleucid sovereignty on official documents. But in practice, Bactria was becoming a self-governing state. The situation in Parthia followed a similar path, though under very different conditions. Around the same time that Diadochi was consolidating his power in Bactria, a local leader named Arsaces, possibly of Scythian or Parni origin, led a rebellion in Parthia. The circumstances of this uprising remain somewhat obscure in ancient sources, but it appears that Parthia's governor, Andragoras, had also declared independence from the Seleucid king. However, his authority was short-lived. Arsaces and his followers, moving swiftly from the northern steppes, overthrew Andragoras and took control of the province. By around the middle of the 3rd century BCE, the Arsacid dynasty was born, the foundation of what would become the Parthian Empire. At first, both Bactria and Parthia were small and vulnerable states. They lacked the vast armies and resources of the Seleucid heartland. Yet, geography favored their survival. The Hindu Kush mountains shielded Bactria from invasion, while Parthia's deserts and mountain passes provided natural defenses. Moreover, the Seleucid kings were in no position to reconquer them. Seleucus II and his successors were preoccupied with wars in Asia Minor, revolts in Syria, and the ever-looming threat from Egypt. For a time, the loss of the eastern provinces may have been seen not as a disaster but as an unfortunate necessity, one of many compromises in maintaining an overstretched empire. Still, the emergence of independent kingdoms in the east carried enormous long-term consequences. In Bactria, the new Greco-Bactrian kingdom quickly flourished under Diadochi and his successors. Freed from the demands of tribute to Antioch, Bactria's wealth was redirected into local development. The new kings styled themselves as basileis, or monarchs, adopting the same Hellenistic royal title used by the Seleucids, Ptolemies, and Antigonids. Their coinage was remarkably sophisticated, featuring Greek inscriptions and realistic portraits that rivaled those of the Western Mediterranean. These coins circulated widely across Central Asia, India, and even China, evidence of Bactria's vibrant trade connections. Greek merchants and artisans mingled with Iranian and Indian traders, creating one of the most cosmopolitan societies of the ancient world. Culturally, Greco-Bactria became a bridge between civilizations. Greek art and architecture blended with Persian and Indian influences, producing a distinctive style that can still be seen in the ruins of cities like Ai-Khanoum, a settlement founded on the Oxus River. Archaeological discoveries from Ai-Khanoum reveal theaters, gymnasia, and temples built in Greek fashion, alongside inscriptions quoting Greek philosophers such as Delphic maxims, "Know thyself, nothing in excess." Yet within these Greek forms, local traditions persisted, visible in motifs drawn from Zoroastrian and Indian iconography. Bactria, though Greek in language and administration, was a multicultural state that embodied the synthesis envisioned by Alexander, but realized only after his empire had fragmented. Parthia's evolution took a different course. Unlike the urbanized Bactria, Parthia retained a more nomadic and martial character. Under Arsaces and his descendants, the Parthians developed a unique style of governance that combined tribal leadership with Hellenistic monarchy. Their power rested on cavalry, swift, heavily armored horsemen who would later become the terror of Roman armies. Initially, the Arsacids acknowledged Seleucid overlordship, perhaps even paying nominal tribute. But this pretense soon faded. As the Seleucid Empire weakened in the west, the Parthians expanded across northeastern Iran, absorbing neighboring regions like Hyrcania and Media. By the end of the 3rd century BCE, they had transformed from a local rebellion into a rising imperial force. The loss of Bactria and Parthia represented more than territorial shrinkage. It marked the beginning of a strategic shift in the balance of power across Asia. The Seleucid kings no longer commanded the same unbroken line of control from the Mediterranean to the Indus. Instead, their empire had become a collection of loosely connected provinces, with large stretches of frontier now occupied by independent states. Economically, the impact was severe. The trade routes that linked Mesopotamia to India, the arteries of wealth in the Hellenistic world, now passed through foreign hands. The Seleucid treasury lost revenue while merchants had to negotiate with multiple authorities to move goods eastward. For the Seleucid monarchy, these losses carried a symbolic blow as well. The eastern provinces had been central to the dynasty's claim of universal rule. Seleucus the Victorious himself had once campaigned in Bactria and reached the borders of India, presenting his empire as the legitimate successor to Alexander's conquests. To lose those lands was to lose part of that mythic legacy. Inscriptions and royal decrees from later kings continued to refer to the Seleucid ruler as King of Kings. But the reality no longer matched the title. The weakening of Eastern authority also exposed deeper structural problems in the empire. The Seleucid system depended on constant royal presence, on the king's ability to travel, inspect, reward, and punish across vast distances. When dynastic wars and foreign invasions trapped the royal family in the West, that system broke down. Local governors, once loyal administrators, became regional monarchs in all but name. The fragmentation of the East was both a symptom and a cause of the broader decline of central power. Yet even amid this fragmentation, the Eastern world remained tied to the Hellenistic sphere. Greek remained the language of administration and culture in Bactria for more than a century. Greek-style coins continued to circulate, and Hellenistic art influenced Buddhist imagery in India, laying the foundations for what modern scholars call Greco-Buddhist art. The cultural legacy of the Seleucids thus outlasted their political control, carried eastward by merchants, soldiers, and settlers who had once served the empire. Back in the West, the Seleucid court could not ignore the implications of these losses. While Antiochus Hyrax's rebellion and Egyptian aggression consumed royal attention, reports from the east described growing defiance among satraps and new powers rising on the steppe frontier. The kings who followed Seleucus II would attempt, intermittently, to reassert authority over these distant lands, but none would fully succeed. The eastern breakaways had entered history as independent actors, no longer provinces of a greater empire, but nations in their own right. By the time Antiochus III the Great ascended to the Seleucid throne in the year 222 BCE, the empire had endured nearly a century of turmoil. Dynastic wars, territorial losses, and rebellious governors had left the once mighty state fragmented and uncertain of its future. Yet, the accession of this young king, barely in his late teens, breathed new hope into a weary realm. Antiochus inherited both an immense challenge and a powerful legacy. The empire his ancestors had carved from Alexander's conquests now stretched unevenly from the Aegean coast to the edges of Iran, its outer provinces restless, its western borders under threat from Egypt, and its eastern lands slipping toward autonomy. To restore Seleucid greatness, Antiochus would have to do more than merely defend his inheritance. He would have to reconquer it. Antiochus was the son of Seleucus III Cyrannus, a short-lived ruler whose reign had been cut short by assassination during a campaign in Asia Minor. His father's death plunged the empire into crisis once again, as rival factions at court vied for power. The army in Asia Minor quickly proclaimed Antiochus king despite his youth, recognizing in him the only viable heir who could unite the state. The early years of his reign were dominated by rebellion, intrigue, and the struggle to consolidate control over the realm. At the time of his accession, the Seleucid Empire was divided in more ways than one. In the east, the newly independent kingdoms of Bactria and Parthia had broken away, as covered in the previous section. In the west, the governors of Asia Minor and the upper satrapies had grown accustomed to acting as near-autonomous rulers. In Syria and Mesopotamia, loyalty to the central government had weakened under the strain of long wars with Egypt. Antiochus inherited not a unified empire, but a patchwork of loosely connected provinces and competing interests. The most immediate challenge to his authority came from Milan, the governor of Media, and his brother Alexander, the satrap of Persis. Both men had served the Seleucids for years and commanded significant military forces. Taking advantage of the young king's inexperience and the influence of corrupt courtiers in Antioch, Milan declared himself independent. His revolt, centered in the highlands of Iran, quickly spread across the eastern provinces. Entire garrisons joined his cause, and several local rulers, sensing opportunity, aligned with the rebels. For a moment, it seemed as though the Seleucid Empire might fracture entirely. Antiochus, advised by his powerful minister Hermias, at first hesitated to confront Milan directly. Hermias, driven by jealousy and a desire to preserve his own influence, convinced the young king to focus instead on the western frontier, where the Egyptian-controlled territories of Coeli Syria remained a constant source of tension. This proved a disastrous miscalculation. While Antiochus lingered in Syria, Milan's rebellion grew stronger, threatening the empire's eastern heartland. The royal forces sent against him were defeated, and Milan began minting his own coins and claiming royal titles, an unmistakable act of defiance. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Antiochus eventually resolved to act. Gathering an army from Mesopotamia and the western provinces, he marched east to confront the rebels. The decisive battle took place near the Tigris River, and according to later accounts, Antiochus personally led his troops with courage and determination. Milan's army was routed, and the rebel leader, seeing defeat inevitable, took his own life. His body was displayed publicly as a warning to others, and the rebellion collapsed soon after. The suppression of Maulan's revolt marked the young king's first major victory and earned him much-needed legitimacy. For the first time since his accession, Antiochus could present himself as the rightful heir to the empire's founders, a ruler capable of restoring order. However, the victory did not bring peace for long. Even as the East was pacified, the West demanded attention. The death of Seleucus II and the internal Seleucid struggles had emboldened Egypt, now ruled by Ptolemy IV Philopator. The Ptolemaic kingdom still controlled Syria, a region both rich and strategic, and its possession remained a matter of deep resentment in the Seleucid court. Antiochus, eager to emulate the conquests of his ancestor Seleucus the Victorious, resolved to reclaim it. This decision would lead to the first major foreign war of his reign, the Fourth Syrian War, culminating in the famous Battle of Raphia. The war's origins lay in both politics and pride. For decades, Syria had been the focal point of conflict between the two great Hellenistic powers. The region's fertile plains, trade routes, and fortified cities made it a prize worth fighting for. Beyond its economic value, controlling Syria was also a matter of prestige, proof of supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean. When Antiochus launched his campaign in the year 219 BCE, he envisioned not merely a border war but a decisive blow that would restore Seleucid dominance over the Levant. The early stages of the campaign were promising. Antiochus's forces advanced rapidly, capturing several key cities, including Seleucia Pieria, which had long been under Egyptian control. His army, reorganized and revitalized after the eastern campaigns, included Macedonian phalanxes, cavalry contingents from Media and Persia, and a corps of Indian war elephants inherited from earlier generations. The king himself took personal command, demonstrating energy and tactical skill that impressed his officers. By the following year, most of Syria was in Seleucid hands, and Antiochus appeared on the verge of complete victory. But Egypt was not idle. Ptolemy IV, though often dismissed by ancient writers as indolent and self-indulgent, possessed capable advisors who recognized the seriousness of the threat. Chief among them was Sosibius, a statesman of great cunning who undertook a massive reorganization of the Egyptian army. For the first time, large numbers of native Egyptians were recruited and trained in the Macedonian style of warfare, breaking with the old reliance on Greek and mercenary troops. This innovation not only expanded Egypt's manpower, but also reshaped the social dynamics of the kingdom, empowering native soldiers in unprecedented ways. In the summer of 217 BCE, the two great armies met near the town of Raphia, located between Gaza and Rafah, along the frontier of Egypt and Syria. It was one of the largest battles ever fought between Hellenistic powers. Ancient historians such as Polybius record that Antiochus commanded around 60,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and more than 100 elephants, while Ptolemy's forces were nearly equal in size. Both sides relied heavily on the traditional Macedonian phalanx, supported by cavalry and elephant corps. The battle opened with a fierce cavalry engagement on the wings. Antiochus personally led his right flank and achieved some initial success, driving back the Egyptian horsemen. However, in his eagerness to pursue them, he lost contact with the center of his army. Meanwhile, in the heart of the battlefield, Ptolemy's phalanx, composed largely of the newly trained Egyptian infantry, held firm against the Seleucid assault. The elephants, which Antiochus had hoped would break the enemy lines, instead caused confusion in his own ranks when they panicked under attack from Ptolemy's larger and more aggressive animals. As the day wore on, the Seleucid line began to crumble. Antiochus, realizing too late that his center was collapsing, tried to rally his troops, but the momentum was lost. The retreat turned into a rout, and thousands of his soldiers were killed or captured. The Battle of Raphia ended in a clear victory for Egypt and a crushing humiliation for Antiochus. For the first time in decades, native Egyptian troops had played a decisive role in defending their kingdom, an achievement celebrated with great enthusiasm in Alexandria. The defeat forced Antiochus to withdraw from Syria and accept the restoration of the pre-war borders. The consequences of Raphia were profound. Militarily, it halted Seleucid expansion to the south for nearly 2 decades. Politically, it weakened Antiochus's prestige at home and encouraged further unrest in the provinces. Yet the young king did not allow the defeat to define his reign. Rather than abandoning his ambitions, he treated Raphia as a lesson in statecraft and resilience. He dismissed corrupt courtiers like Hermias, reorganized the administration, and began planning a series of campaigns that would eventually restore much of the empire's former glory. The defeat at Raphia in the year 217 BCE might have broken a lesser ruler, but for Antiochus III the Great, it became a turning point. Though the loss to Egypt had been humiliating, it also clarified the empire's weaknesses. Antiochus realized that his power could not be rebuilt through mere diplomacy or isolated campaigns. The Seleucid Empire needed unity, discipline, and renewed wealth. The key to all three lay in the east, those vast provinces that had once been the source of the empire's strength, but had long drifted toward independence. Over the next decade, Antiochus embarked on one of the most remarkable expeditions of the Hellenistic age, a sweeping campaign of reconquest and renewal that historians would later call the Great Anabasis, echoing the famous journey of Xenophon centuries earlier. After the setback in the south, Antiochus turned inward to repair his realm. He dismissed the corrupt minister Hermias, whose jealous intrigues had nearly torn the court apart, and began rebuilding his military and administrative systems. His vision went beyond simply stabilizing his borders. He sought to restore the empire to the territorial extent of Seleucus the Victorious. To accomplish this, Antiochus would have to reassert control over the eastern satrapies, Media, Persis, Parthia, Hyrcania, and the distant lands of Bactria. These regions had not been directly governed from Antioch for decades, and their rulers had grown accustomed to acting independently. Some, like the Parthians, had already become kings in their own right. For Antiochus, reclaiming these territories was both a practical and symbolic mission, to prove that the Seleucid crown still commanded the world Alexander had conquered. Antiochus began his campaign around the year 212 BCE, first consolidating the western provinces before marching eastward. His initial targets were the regions closest to Mesopotamia, where Seleucid authority still existed but had weakened. The king moved through Media and Susiana, where rebellious satraps had seized the opportunity of past instability to rule autonomously. Antiochus combined diplomacy and force, removing resistant governors and rewarding those who pledged loyalty. In Media, he established new garrisons and reorganized local administration to ensure a more direct link to the royal court. The campaign was conducted efficiently and with relatively little bloodshed, earning him respect among both Greek settlers and local populations. From Media, Antiochus advanced into Persis, the old heartland of the Achaemenid Persian kings. The Persians, though long under Macedonian rule, retained a strong sense of identity and local pride. Antiochus understood this well. He made careful use of Persian traditions of kingship, offering sacrifices at local temples and presenting himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as the legitimate successor to both Alexander and Darius. His policy of respecting native customs won him allies among the priestly and noble classes. This blend of Greek and Persian diplomacy had been a hallmark of Seleucid rule since the time of Seleucus the Victorious, but under Antiochus it gained renewed importance. He understood that the survival of his empire depended on more than Greek soldiers. It required the cooperation of the eastern peoples who formed its foundation. Having restored order in the Iranian plateau, Antiochus turned his attention to Parthia and Hyrcania, where the Arsacid dynasty had established itself as a new power. The Parthians, under King Arsaces II, controlled much of northeastern Iran, including key mountain passes and trade routes. Antiochus's objective was not merely to punish rebellion, but to reassert Seleucid supremacy. The campaign was arduous. The terrain of Parthia was harsh, marked by deserts and narrow valleys that favored defenders. Antiochus divided his army into smaller contingents capable of rapid movement and supplied them through well-organized logistics. His forces advanced methodically, defeating Parthian detachments and recapturing fortresses that had fallen decades earlier. Ancient sources describe Antiochus's campaign in Parthia as a masterclass in organization. He avoided reckless engagements, preferring sieges and negotiations that preserved his troops and supplies. When at last he reached the Parthian capital, the Arsacid king submitted, recognizing Seleucid overlordship in exchange for retaining local rule. Rather than attempt to destroy the Parthians outright, Antiochus accepted their submission as a vassal state. This pragmatic policy, while leaving Parthia nominally independent, temporarily restored Seleucid authority over the region and reopened trade routes towards Central Asia. From Parthia, the king pressed onward to Bactria, the most distant and challenging of his targets. The Greco-Bactrian kingdom, founded by Diadochi and now ruled by Euthydemus I, had grown into a prosperous and self-confident realm. Unlike Parthia, Bactria was not a rebellious frontier, but a rival Hellenistic kingdom ruled by Greeks who viewed themselves as heirs of Alexander. Its cities were centers of Greek culture and commerce, and its armies were disciplined and well-equipped. Antiochus knew that reclaiming Bactria by force would be no simple task, yet he also recognized its immense value. Control of Bactria meant access to the trade routes leading to India and Central Asia, the lifelines of wealth that once filled Seleucid coffers. The campaign into Bactria was one of the most daring military undertakings of the age. Antiochus crossed the Hindu Kush mountains with a large army, navigating treacherous passes and arid plains. Euthydemus met him in battle near the river Areius, and though his forces fought with determination, the Seleucids emerged victorious after a hard-fought engagement. Euthydemus retreated into the fortified city of Bactra, where Antiochus laid siege. The siege dragged on for more than 2 years, with both sides demonstrating endurance and tactical ingenuity. Antiochus's engineers built elaborate siege works, while the defenders used the city's strong walls and abundant supplies to hold out. Despite his initial advantage, Antiochus recognized that continued warfare in such remote terrain would exhaust his army and strain his supply lines. He therefore turned to negotiation. The meeting between Antiochus and Euthydemus became one of the most famous diplomatic encounters of the Hellenistic period. According to the historian Polybius, Euthydemus argued that he had not rebelled against the Seleucids, but had overthrown a previous rebel and preserved Greek rule in the east. He appealed to Antiochus's sense of pragmatism, warning that if the Greeks were expelled from Bactria, barbarian tribes would overrun the region and threaten the entire empire. Antiochus, impressed by his reasoning and recognizing the advantage of a loyal ally in such a distant land, agreed to peace. Euthydemus retained his throne as a subordinate ally, and his son Demetrius was even betrothed to one of Antiochus's daughters, sealing the alliance through marriage. This diplomatic victory marked the climax of the Great Anabasis. By avoiding a costly and uncertain conquest, Antiochus achieved his strategic goals. The eastern satrapies once again acknowledged Seleucid supremacy, trade routes were reopened, and the king's prestige soared across the empire. The campaign also had a profound psychological effect. It reminded both friend and foe that the Seleucid crown still commanded the respect of distant provinces and rival kings. Antiochus returned west as a triumphant monarch, hailed as the Great by his subjects. The journey home, however, was not without further achievements. On his way back through the Iranian plateau, Antiochus visited the sacred city of Ecbatana, where he performed rituals at the ancient temples, reinforcing his image as a ruler in the Persian tradition. He also reorganized the administration of the eastern provinces, appointing loyal governors and establishing garrisons to maintain Seleucid presence. In Armenia, he imposed peace on local dynasts who had taken advantage of earlier instability. Everywhere he went, he combined military power with political diplomacy, creating a network of alliances and dependencies that mirrored the empire at its height under Seleucus the Victorious. When Antiochus finally returned to the western provinces around the year 205 BCE, He was at the zenith of his power. The Eastern campaign had restored the empire's territorial integrity and filled the treasury with new revenues from trade and tribute. The wealth of the East, gold, gems, textiles, and spices, flowed once more to the Seleucid capital at Antioch. Greek cities across the empire honored him with titles and festivals, celebrating the rebirth of imperial strength. Even distant rulers recognized his success. His name was spoken with respect in both Alexandria and Macedon. The dream of a united Hellenistic world under Seleucid leadership seemed for a moment within reach. Yet the Great Anabasis, for all its glory, also carried hidden consequences. The campaign had stretched the empire's resources and revealed the limits of what even a brilliant ruler could control. The submission of Parthia and Bactria rested on fragile alliances rather than firm conquest. The loyalty of distant satraps depended on Antiochus' personal prestige, an asset that could not be inherited. Still, in the short term, these concerns were overshadowed by the triumph of the moment. Antiochus had achieved what none of his predecessors since Seleucus the Victorious had managed. He had restored the eastern half of the empire and reaffirmed its place as one of the great powers of the ancient world. When Antiochus III the Great returned from his long eastern expedition around the year 205 BCE, he was no longer the young monarch who had once faltered at Raphia. He was now a seasoned conqueror, celebrated as the restorer of empire and the master of kings. His Great Anabasis had revived Seleucid prestige and refilled the royal treasury. Merchants, soldiers, and city-states alike hailed him as a ruler who had restored the ancient glory of Seleucus the Victorious. Yet the work of empire was far from finished. The reconquest of the East had strengthened the foundations of Seleucid power. But the empire's heart, the wealthy and contested region of Syria, remained under Egyptian control. For Antiochus, regaining that land was both a matter of pride and strategy. It would be his next great campaign, one that would define the high point of his reign. The opportunity for war came from Egypt itself. The long reign of Ptolemy, the fourth Philopator, had left the Ptolemaic state weakened by internal corruption and administrative decay. The victory at Raphia had preserved Egyptian dominance in Syria for a time, but it had also unleashed dangerous social forces at home. The recruitment of native Egyptians into the army, a necessity during that earlier war, had altered the balance of power within the kingdom. Once the war ended, many of these soldiers returned to the Nile Valley expecting rewards and privileges that the government could not deliver. Discontent spread and revolts erupted in Upper Egypt. When Ptolemy IV died around the year 204 BCE, the situation grew worse. His successor, Ptolemy V Epiphanes, was a mere child, leaving the throne in the hands of regents and courtiers, more concerned with intrigue than stability. Antiochus saw in this Egyptian weakness a chance to complete what he had begun 2 decades earlier. The rich lands of Syria, stretching from the Lebanese mountains to the approaches of Gaza, had been fought over for generations. To control them meant securing the land bridge between Asia and Africa, the vital artery of commerce linking the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and beyond. For the Seleucids, it also meant protecting the approaches to their Syrian capital at Antioch. Antiochus's ambitions were clear. He would reclaim the southern provinces, assert Seleucid hegemony in the Levant, and perhaps, if fortune favored him, extend his power into Egypt itself. At the same time, Antiochus was not alone in exploiting Egypt's crisis. In the west, Philip V of Macedon also saw an opportunity to expand his influence. The two kings concluded a secret pact, agreeing to divide the Ptolemaic territories between them, Philip taking the Aegean islands and western possessions, and Antiochus claiming Syria and beyond. This agreement, later discovered by the Romans, would have lasting consequences, but for now it seemed to promise an easy partition of the faltering Egyptian empire. Antiochus began his campaign into Syria around the year 201 BCE, marking the start of what historians call the Fifth Syrian War. His army, rebuilt and battle-hardened from the eastern campaigns, advanced swiftly through the region. The Egyptian garrisons, demoralized and underpaid, offered little resistance. City after city fell into Seleucid hands. By the following year, Antiochus had occupied most of Phoenicia and southern Syria. His forces besieged key fortresses such as Gaza and Sidon, securing control of the coastline. The campaign was conducted with remarkable precision, combining naval operations along the Mediterranean with land advances through the valleys of Lebanon. In Alexandria, the regency government struggled to respond. The young Ptolemy V was too young to rule, and his advisors were divided. Some sought negotiation, others called for war. The Egyptians appealed to Rome, whose influence was beginning to extend into the eastern Mediterranean following its victories in the west. Though Rome was still preoccupied with Carthage and Macedon, its Senate issued cautious warnings to Antiochus and Philip not to harm Ptolemy's realm. Antiochus, aware that Rome's attention was divided, ignored the threats and pressed on with his campaign. The decisive moment came in the Battle of Panion, fought near the sources of the Jordan River around the year 200 BCE. The Egyptian army, led by its general Scopas of Aetolia, had mustered to retake Syria. Scopas was a capable commander and had recruited many Greek mercenaries to rebuild the Egyptian forces. For a brief time, he succeeded in driving the Seleucid garrisons out of parts of southern Syria. But Antiochus, marching south with a large army, met him near Panion, where the terrain favored the Seleucid tactics of cavalry and elephant warfare. Ancient accounts describe Panion as one of the most skillfully executed battles of the Hellenistic age. Antiochus positioned his war elephants on the slopes above the enemy, using them not as shock troops, but as a barrier to channel the Egyptian advance. His son, the future Antiochus IV Epiphanes, commanded one wing of the army and distinguished himself in combat. As the battle unfolded, the Seleucid phalanx pressed forward while the elephants and cavalry enveloped Scopus's flanks. The Egyptian line broke, and Scopus's troops fled toward Sidon, where they were besieged and forced to surrender. The victory was complete. Syria was finally secured for the Seleucid Empire. The triumph at Panion transformed the political landscape of the eastern Mediterranean. For the first time since the days of Antiochus I, the Seleucids controlled the entire region from the Taurus Mountains to the borders of Egypt. The conquest of Syria also brought immense economic benefits. The ports of Phoenicia reopened under Seleucid authority, facilitating trade between Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. The fertile plains of the Orontes and the Bekaa Valley once again supplied grain and revenue to the royal treasury. Antiochus celebrated his success with grand festivals and dedications, proclaiming himself the restorer of order and prosperity. In the years that followed, Antiochus sought to consolidate his gains through diplomacy. Recognizing the limits of continued war with Egypt, he negotiated a peace settlement with the Ptolemaic regency. The terms were highly favorable to the Seleucids. Syria and Phoenicia were formally recognized as Seleucid possessions, while Egypt retained its core territories. To strengthen the peace, Antiochus arranged a marriage alliance between his daughter Cleopatra I and the young Ptolemy V. The union, celebrated a few years later, symbolized a reconciliation between the two dynasties, though in practice it confirmed Seleucid dominance. Cleopatra would later serve as a vital intermediary between the two kingdoms, and her children would carry both Seleucid and Ptolemaic blood, a sign of how intertwined the Hellenistic royal houses had become. With the southern frontier secure, Antiochus turned his attention to the Aegean and Asia Minor, where the political situation was changing rapidly. The collapse of Ptolemaic influence had left a power vacuum that smaller states and leagues sought to fill. The city of Pergamon, ruled by Eumenes II of the Attalid dynasty, was emerging as a regional power supported by Rome. In Greece, Philip V's aggression had drawn Roman intervention, leading to the defeat of Macedon in the Second Macedonian War. These developments brought the rising Roman Republic closer to the Eastern Mediterranean, an ominous shift that Antiochus would soon have to confront. For the moment, however, the Seleucid Empire stood at the height of its power. The victories of Antiochus III had reversed decades of decline. From Anatolia to Iran, from the mountains of Armenia to the deserts of Arabia, the empire was once again the largest and wealthiest of the Hellenistic kingdoms. Antiochus styled himself not only as king, but as a universal ruler in the mold of Alexander. In public inscriptions and royal decrees, he was called Great King, echoing the old Persian title once borne by Darius and Cyrus. He revived the practice of founding cities, including Antiochia in Persis and Antiochia in Margiana, extending Seleucid presence deep into Asia. His court at Antioch became a center of art, science, and administration, attracting Greek intellectuals and Eastern scholars alike. Yet beneath this grandeur lay new challenges. The success of the Anabasis and the victory at Panion had expanded the empire's borders, but maintaining control over such a vast realm required constant vigilance. The loyalty of newly reconquered provinces depended on Antiochus's personal authority. Moreover, the Western world was changing. Rome's growing involvement in Greek affairs threatened to upset the delicate balance that had long defined Hellenistic politics. The same alliance with Philip V that had aided Antiochus's conquest of Coele Syria now made him suspect in Roman eyes. When Antiochus III the Great completed his conquest of Coele Syria and secured peace with Egypt, he stood at the zenith of Seleucid power. His empire, revitalized after a century of turbulence, now stretched from the mountains of Armenia to the frontiers of India and from the Aegean Sea to the Persian Gulf. The wealth of the eastern provinces once again flowed westward, and the great cities, Antioch, Seleucia, and Sardis, bustled with commerce and administration. Yet for all his success, Antiochus was not content to rule an empire of peace. The spirit of expansion that had driven Alexander's conquests still burned within him. Having reclaimed the east and the south, Antiochus now turned his gaze westward toward the Aegean and the Greek world, lands that had once belonged to the empire of his ancestors and that were now falling under the shadow of a new power, Rome. The Western world in the early 2nd century BCE was in flux. Rome had emerged victorious from its wars against Carthage and Macedon, establishing itself as the dominant force in the Western Mediterranean. But its influence was now spreading eastward. The Roman victory over Philip V of Macedon in the Second Macedonian War had made Rome the arbiter of Greek affairs. Greek city-states, long accustomed to balancing one Hellenistic power against another, increasingly looked to the Roman Senate for protection or patronage. To Antiochus, this expansion of Roman influence was both a challenge and an opportunity. The old Macedonian heartlands and the cities of Asia Minor, once part of the Seleucid realm, were vulnerable. If he moved quickly, he might reassert Seleucid authority before Rome established a permanent foothold. Antiochus's ambitions in the west began with Asia Minor. The region had become a patchwork of independent kingdoms, free cities, and former Ptolemaic possessions. The most significant of these was Pergamon, ruled by Eumenes II, whose dynasty owed its rise to the decline of Seleucid control. Supported by Rome, Pergamon had expanded its territory at the expense of its neighbors and now posed a direct obstacle to Seleucid influence. Antiochus sought to restore his authority over these lands, both to strengthen his position in the Aegean and to re-establish Seleucid prestige among the Greek cities. Around the year 200 BCE, Antiochus launched a campaign in Asia Minor, reclaiming territories along the western coast and securing alliances with local rulers. His victories brought him into contact with the Greek world proper, and many in Greece looked upon him as a potential liberator from Roman oversight. The Aetolian League, a confederation of Greek states dissatisfied with Rome's growing power, began to correspond with Antiochus, urging him to cross into Greece and champion Hellenic freedom. These appeals struck a familiar chord. The idea of a Greek monarch leading a coalition against Western invaders evoked memories of Alexander and his successors. Antiochus, already styled the Great, saw in this a chance to claim that legacy for himself. At the same time, another figure entered the Seleucid court, one whose name carried immense weight throughout the Mediterranean. Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who had once brought Rome to the brink of destruction, had fled into exile after Carthage's defeat in the Second Punic War. For years he had sought refuge among the Eastern kings, offering his expertise to those who might one day challenge Rome. Eventually, he found a willing patron in Antiochus. The two men, though very different in character, shared a common purpose: the containment of Roman power. Hannibal urged Antiochus to take the offensive, to unite the Eastern kingdoms under his banner, and to bring the war to Roman soil. Antiochus admired his boldness and appointed him as a military advisor, though he never fully embraced his strategy of all-out confrontation. In the year 192 BCE, Antiochus made his fateful move. Encouraged by the Aetolian League, he crossed the Hellespont into Greece with a relatively small army, perhaps 10,000 men. His aim was to rally the Greek states to his cause before the Romans could intervene. At first, his arrival was greeted with enthusiasm. The Aetolians proclaimed him the champion of Greek liberty, and several towns opened their gates to him. Yet Antiochus soon discovered that Greek politics were more divided than he had anticipated. The Achaean League, a rival confederation, remained loyal to Rome, while other states adopted a cautious neutrality. Even in regions that welcomed him, support was hesitant and conditional. The Greeks admired Antiochus as a king, but feared the consequences of defying the Roman Republic. When Rome responded, its reaction was swift and decisive. The Senate declared war, framing Antiochus' intervention as an act of aggression against its allies. A Roman army, led by Manius Acilius Glabrio, crossed into Greece and marched south toward Thermopylae, where Antiochus had fortified his position. The narrow pass, famous as the site of the Persian defeat of the Spartans centuries earlier, seemed an ideal place for defense. But history would not repeat itself in the Seleucid king's favor. The Romans, guided by local allies, outflanked his position through the mountain paths and overwhelmed his forces. Antiochus was forced to retreat northward, abandoning Greece altogether. The dream of leading a pan-Hellenic resistance collapsed in a single campaign. Undeterred, Antiochus withdrew across the Aegean and prepared for a larger war. Rome, emboldened by its success, sent envoys demanding that he evacuate Asia Minor as well. Antiochus refused. His defeat in Greece had been a setback, not a disaster, and he still commanded the resources of a vast empire. Moreover, he believed that the Romans, unfamiliar with Eastern warfare, could be defeated on his own ground. Hannibal, ever the strategist, advised him to strike first, perhaps by invading Italy as he himself had once done. But Antiochus hesitated. His cautious temperament and the competing advice of his court delayed decisive action. Meanwhile, Rome forged new alliances, most notably with Eumenes of Pergamon, whose local knowledge and naval strength would prove invaluable in the coming conflict. The war that followed, known as the Roman-Seleucid War, unfolded across land and sea. In the Aegean, Roman and Pergamene fleets defeated the Seleucid navy at Corycus and later at Myonyssus, giving Rome command of the sea. On land, the decisive encounter came in the plains of western Asia Minor, near the town of Magnesia. There, in the winter of 191 to 190 BCE, the armies of Rome and its allies faced the full might of the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus's army was enormous by contemporary standards, over 60,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and a corps of more than 50 war elephants. His battle line was a spectacle of Hellenistic military grandeur, heavily armored phalanxes at the center, cavalry on the wings, scythed chariots, and even units of cataphracts inspired by Eastern traditions. The Roman army, under the command of Lucius Cornelius Scipio, brother of the famous Scipio Africanus, was smaller but more flexible. Its strength lay in disciplined legionary formations and superior coordination with allied cavalry from Pergamon. As the battle began, Antiochus personally led a cavalry charge on his right flank, driving back the Roman horsemen and pursuing them too far from the main field. This momentary success mirrored his earlier mistake at Raphia. Meanwhile, in the center, the Seleucids' scythed chariots caused confusion among their own troops, and the elephants panicked under Roman missile fire. The phalanx, deprived of cavalry support and vulnerable on both flanks, could not withstand the coordinated Roman assault. When Antiochus attempted to rally his forces, it was too late. The Roman legions advanced inexorably, breaking the Seleucid line. Thousands were killed and the rest scattered. Antiochus fled the field, narrowly escaping capture. The Battle of Magnesia was a catastrophe, one that shattered Seleucid power in Asia Minor and marked the beginning of Rome's dominance in the eastern Mediterranean. The aftermath of the defeat was formalized in the Treaty of Apamea in the year 188 BCE. The terms were harsh. Antiochus was forced to surrender all territories west of the Taurus Mountains, including Asia Minor, which was handed over to Pergamon and Rhodes. His navy was reduced to a token force, and his war elephants were surrendered. Even more crippling was the financial indemnity, 15,000 talents of silver to be paid over 12 years. To ensure compliance, hostages were taken to Rome. Among them, his younger son Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who would later return to play a pivotal role in Seleucid history. For Antiochus, the defeat at Magnesia marked the end of his grand ambitions. The empire he had rebuilt through 2 decades of warfare was now financially burdened and politically constrained. The western provinces, once vibrant centers of Seleucid administration, were lost forever. Only the eastern heartlands, Syria, Mesopotamia, and Iran, remained securely under royal control. Yet even in defeat, Antiochus did not abandon the duties of kingship. He spent his remaining years reorganizing the empire's finances and reasserting authority over rebellious provinces. In the year 187 BCE, Antiochus met his end while campaigning in the eastern provinces, reportedly during an attempt to plunder a temple in Elymais to pay the Roman indemnity. The once great conqueror, who had marched across continents and commanded the loyalty of kings, died far from the centers of power he had fought so hard to restore. His reign, though ending in failure, left a complex legacy. He had expanded, reformed, and revitalized the Seleucid state, but his overreach had also brought it into collision with the new empire of the West. When Antiochus IV Epiphanes came to the throne in the year 175 BCE, the Seleucid Empire was still reeling from the consequences of the Treaty of Apamea. His father, Antiochus III the Great, had revived the empire's fortunes through conquest and reform, only to lose them in a single defeat at Magnesia. The resulting treaty had stripped the Seleucids of their possessions in Asia Minor, imposed crushing financial reparations, and placed Rome as the silent overseer of Hellenistic affairs. Into this diminished world stepped a king whose ambitions far exceeded the resources of his realm. Antiochus IV would become one of the most remarkable and controversial rulers of his age, a man of grand vision, restless energy, and volatile temperament. His reign marked both the last great resurgence of Seleucid power and the beginning of its irreversible decline. Antiochus IV had spent much of his youth as a hostage in Rome, one of the conditions imposed by the Treaty of Apamea. This experience shaped his outlook in complex ways. He observed firsthand the discipline, organization, and pragmatism of the Roman Republic. At the same time, he developed a deep understanding of how Rome projected power through influence rather than conquest. When his brother Seleucus IV Philopator later exchanged him for another royal hostage, Antiochus returned to a court weighed down by debt, factional intrigue, and declining authority. Yet he came back not as a broken captive, but as a shrewd and adaptable survivor. The circumstances of his accession were characteristic of Seleucid instability. After Seleucus IV was assassinated by one of his ministers, Antiochus seized the throne with the support of the powerful noble Eumenes of Pergamon, who preferred a pliant ally on the Syrian throne. Antiochus quickly consolidated his power by eliminating rivals and asserting control over the army. To secure his legitimacy, he adopted the epithet Epiphanes, meaning God manifest. The title signaled both divinity and visibility, an assertion that he was not merely a king, but a living embodiment of divine favor. His coins portrayed him with radiant features reminiscent of Zeus, while his public appearances were theatrical and extravagant, blending religious symbolism with political propaganda. From the outset, Antiochus sought to restore the empire's dignity on the world stage. He understood that the empire's survival depended not only on recovering lost territory, but also on reviving its prestige. His policies were ambitious, often extravagant, and sometimes erratic, reflecting both genius and excess. Within the first years of his reign, he launched extensive reforms to the royal administration, strengthened the army, and invested heavily in urban development. The great cities of Antioch, Seleucia, and Sardis became showcases of Hellenistic grandeur. He built temples, theaters, and gymnasia, patronized Greek festivals, and introduced Roman-style spectacles such as gladiatorial contests. Ancient writers later described him as a man equally at home in the company of philosophers and in the bustle of the marketplace, a king who mingled freely with citizens and sometimes shocked the nobility with his unconventional behavior. Yet behind this outward brilliance lay a sober strategy. Antiochus's reforms aimed to bind together a diverse empire through shared culture and centralized authority. Like Alexander before him, he saw Greek civilization as a unifying force. By promoting Hellenistic customs, language, education, and civic life, he hoped to foster loyalty among both Greek settlers and local populations. His urban policies also had practical motives. The construction of new cities and the restoration of older ones strengthened royal administration and increased tax revenues. At the same time, Antiochus revived the Seleucid military. He reorganized the phalanx, introduced new cavalry units modeled after Roman examples, and re-equipped his army with modern weaponry. His aim was clear: to free the empire from dependence on Roman goodwill and to reassert its independence. For the first time since the Treaty of Apamea, the Seleucids began to act as an autonomous power. The most immediate test of this renewed confidence came in Egypt. Following the death of Ptolemy V Epiphanes, the Egyptian throne had passed to his young son Ptolemy VI Philometor, who ruled under the regency of his mother Cleopatra I, herself a Seleucid princess. When she died, a power struggle broke out between pro-Seleucid and anti-Seleucid factions in Alexandria. Antiochus saw an opportunity to intervene in Egypt's affairs under the pretext of protecting his nephew's inheritance. In reality, he sought to achieve what his father and grandfather had failed to do: bring Egypt under Seleucid influence, or perhaps even annex it entirely. In the year 170 BCE, Antiochus invaded Egypt with a powerful army. His forces advanced swiftly, defeating Egyptian resistance and capturing Pelusium, the gateway to the Nile Delta. He entered Memphis, where he was ceremoniously recognized as protector of the kingdom and guardian of Ptolemy VI. The invasion was conducted with calculated moderation. Antiochus presented himself not as a conqueror, but as a restorer of legitimate rule, maintaining the forms of Egyptian kingship while stationing Seleucid garrisons in key cities. However, the occupation alarmed both Alexandria and Rome. The Alexandrians, unwilling to accept Seleucid dominance, proclaimed Ptolemy the Eighth Physcon, the younger brother of Ptolemy VI, as co-ruler. This created a divided monarchy, with one king under Seleucid protection in Memphis and another in Alexandria, backed by the populace. Antiochus responded by launching a second campaign the following year, capturing much of the Delta and besieging Alexandria itself. His victory seemed certain. Egypt lay at his feet, and the ancient dream of a unified Syrian-Egyptian empire was within reach. Then came the intervention of Rome. The Senate, fresh from its triumphs in the West, had no intention of allowing any Hellenistic monarch to dominate the eastern Mediterranean. A Roman envoy, Gaius Popilius Laenas, was dispatched to meet Antiochus near Alexandria. What followed became one of the most famous encounters in ancient diplomacy. When the two men met, Popilius handed the king a decree from the Senate demanding that he withdraw from Egypt and Cyprus immediately. Antiochus hesitated, saying he would consider the request after consulting his advisors. Popilius, holding a stick, drew a circle in the sand around the king and declared that Rome required an answer before he stepped outside it. The moment was electric. Antiochus, surrounded by his army yet facing a single Roman envoy, understood the meaning of the gesture. To defy Rome was to invite annihilation. To obey was to admit subordination. After a pause, he chose the latter. He agreed to withdraw from Egypt, thus ending his campaign. The confrontation, later known as the Day of Eleusis, symbolized the limits of Seleucid ambition in a world increasingly dominated by Rome. Antiochus had regained confidence, but not sovereignty. His empire remained strong, but its freedom of action was now sharply circumscribed by Roman power. Frustrated abroad, Antiochus turned his attention inward. The experience in Egypt taught him that true strength must come from within the empire, rather than through external conquest. His domestic policies became more assertive, even authoritarian. He intensified efforts to centralize administration, increase taxation, and promote uniformity of culture. In many cities, especially those with large Jewish or Eastern populations, these measures created tension. Nowhere was this tension more evident than in Judea, a small but strategically located province between Egypt and Syria. The region had long been a point of contention between the Seleucids and Ptolemies, and its population was deeply divided between Hellenized elites and traditionalist groups loyal to the Jewish faith and law. Initially, Antiochus's relationship with Judea was peaceful. He confirmed the privileges of the high priest Jason, who had secured his position by adopting pro-Hellenistic policies and promising tribute. However, internal rivalries soon destabilized the province. Jason was ousted by his rival Menelaus, whose supporters embraced a more radical program of Hellenization. When revolts broke out, Antiochus interpreted them as rebellion against royal authority rather than as religious disputes. In response, he intervened harshly, sacking Jerusalem and installing a garrison in the city. Temples were plundered, and Jewish religious practices were restricted. The king ordered the establishment of Greek cults, including the dedication of an altar to Zeus in the Jerusalem temple. To Antiochus, this was a policy of unification, an attempt to integrate Judea into the broader Hellenistic culture of the empire. To the Jews, it was an act of sacrilege. The measures sparked what would become known as the Maccabean Revolt, led by the priest Mattathias and his sons, most famously Judas Maccabeus. Though this uprising would continue long after Antiochus's death, it began during his reign and reflected the unintended consequences of his policies. The king who sought unity through culture had instead provoked rebellion through coercion. The death of Antiochus IV Epiphanes in the year 164 BCE left the Seleucid Empire both powerful and precarious. His reign had restored vigor to the monarchy, but had also ignited deep internal unrest, most notably in Judea, where his religious and cultural policies provoked open rebellion. With the throne passing to his young son, Antiochus V Eupator, the empire entered a period of regency and political instability. What followed was a drawn-out struggle between royal authority and local autonomy, a conflict that revealed how fragile Seleucid power had become in the mid-2nd century BCE. The revolt that erupted in Judea during the final years of Antiochus IV's rule had begun as a response to religious persecution, but quickly evolved into a broader fight for political independence. The Seleucid attempt to impose Hellenistic culture and worship upon a people fiercely loyal to their own faith backfired catastrophically. The policy, which Antiochus believed would unify his realm, instead exposed the deep divisions within it. In Judea, the desecration of the temple in Jerusalem and the banning of Jewish rituals outraged the population. The revolt, led initially by the priest Mattathias of Modine and later by his sons, transformed local resistance into a sustained national movement. Mattathias, according to later accounts, sparked the rebellion when he refused to offer sacrifice to the Greek gods and struck down a royal official attempting to enforce the decree. Fleeing into the hills with his followers, he called upon all who were faithful to the ancestral laws to join him. From these beginnings arose the Hasmonean family, better known to history as the Maccabees, whose leadership would define Jewish resistance for a generation. After Mattathias's death, his son Judas Maccabeus assumed command, displaying remarkable military skill and charisma. His forces, though small and poorly equipped, employed guerrilla tactics, striking quickly against Seleucid garrisons and retreating into the rugged Judean countryside. At first, the Seleucid authorities dismissed the revolt as a minor disturbance in a distant province. The empire's attention was divided by more pressing matters: the succession crisis following Antiochus IV's death, rivalries among court officials, and renewed tension with neighboring powers. The regent Lysias, who governed on behalf of the young king Antiochus V, eventually recognized the seriousness of the rebellion and marched south to suppress it. His campaigns met with mixed success. Judas and his followers won several notable victories, defeating Seleucid detachments at Emmaus and Beth Zur, and briefly recapturing Jerusalem. The temple, which had been defiled by the introduction of Greek cults, was cleansed and rededicated in an event later commemorated as Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. The reconsecration of the temple in the year 164 BCE marked a symbolic turning point. It demonstrated that the rebels could not only resist, but also reclaim and govern territory. For the Seleucid Empire, already strained by wars and financial burdens, the cost of continued campaigns in Judea grew increasingly difficult to justify. Lysias, preoccupied with rival claimants to power in Antioch, negotiated a temporary settlement. He granted the Jews limited religious freedom in exchange for renewed loyalty to the crown. This compromise, though short-lived, revealed a larger truth. The Seleucids could no longer enforce uniform control across their empire without accommodation and negotiation. Meanwhile, political instability deepened at the heart of the empire. The young Antiochus V, still a child, was surrounded by ambitious regents and generals. Within a few years, he was deposed and executed by Demetrius I Soter, a prince who had escaped captivity in Rome and claimed the throne as the rightful heir of Seleucus IV. Demetrius's rise promised a restoration of strong rule, but his reign only intensified the empire's internal divisions. Demetrius inherited not only the Judean rebellion, but also broader challenges to Seleucid authority. In the eastern provinces, local governors and dynasts had grown semi-independent. In the west, Pergamon and Rome continued to interfere in Seleucid affairs, supporting rival claimants whenever it suited their interests. Within this volatile context, Demetrius sought to reassert royal control through both force and reform. He replaced unreliable governors, restructured the army, and attempted to stabilize the administration. But his rule, though energetic, faced constant resistance from factions that had grown accustomed to autonomy. In Judea, hostilities resumed. The temporary peace granted by Lysias collapsed as Seleucid officials tried once again to reimpose control. Judas Maccabeus, now a national hero, continued his campaign, forging alliances with neighboring peoples and appealing for external support. Remarkably, he reached out to Rome, whose reputation as a defender of small nations had begun to spread across the eastern Mediterranean. A formal alliance between the Jews and Rome was concluded, a striking indication of how far Seleucid authority had eroded. Demetrius responded by sending a massive army under the general Nicanor, but the campaign ended in disaster. Judas defeated and killed Nicanor in battle, further emboldening the rebels. However, the rebellion's fortunes soon reversed. A renewed Seleucid offensive overwhelmed the Jewish forces, and Judas himself was killed in combat near Elasa around 160 BCE. Leadership passed to his brothers, Jonathan and Simon, who shifted from open warfare to diplomacy, exploiting the civil wars that plagued the Seleucid state. Those civil wars formed the backdrop for the gradual transformation of the empire from a centralized monarchy into a patchwork of competing fiefdoms. After Demetrius I's death, new pretenders arose, supported alternately by Egypt, Pergamon, or Rome. The most notable among them was Alexander Balas, who claimed to be a son of Antiochus IV and secured Egyptian backing. His revolt split the empire once again, with some provinces supporting him and others remaining loyal to the legitimate Seleucid line. Amid the chaos, Jonathan Maccabeus maneuvered skillfully, obtaining recognition as high priest and effective governor of Judea in exchange for his support. The pattern repeated itself across the empire. Local leaders learned to bargain with the weakened monarchy, trading loyalty for autonomy. In the east, semi-independent rulers in Parthia and Media expanded their control. In the west, governors of Asia Minor and Cilicia acted increasingly on their own authority. Even within Syria itself, cities and satrapies negotiated privileges directly with rival claimants to the throne. The Seleucid kings, once masters of a unified empire, now found themselves dependent on regional alliances to maintain power. Under Demetrius II Nicator, the empire briefly reunited, but only in name. His reign saw renewed campaigns in the east, where he attempted to recover territory from the rising Parthians. Instead, he was captured and held prisoner by the Parthian king Mithridates I, a humiliation that underscored how far Seleucid prestige had fallen since the days of Antiochus the Great. During his captivity, yet another pretender, Tryphon, seized control of Syria, plunging the empire into further chaos. Amid this turbulence, Judea's autonomy solidified. Simon Maccabeus, the last of the original brothers, took advantage of the competing kings to secure formal independence. Around 142 BCE, Demetrius II, desperate for allies, granted Judea exemption from tribute and recognized Simon as high priest and ruler. The Seleucid Empire, once the most extensive of the Hellenistic states, had now lost effective control over the very province that had once symbolized its reach between Asia and Africa. The Maccabean revolt thus represented more than a local uprising. It was a microcosm of the broader disintegration of Seleucid authority. The causes were structural as much as political. The empire's vastness, diversity, and reliance on personal loyalty had always made it vulnerable to fragmentation. When royal power weakened through dynastic strife, foreign interference, or economic strain, local identities reasserted themselves. Antiochus IV's heavy-handed attempt to impose uniformity accelerated this process, turning provincial discontent into organized independence. By the middle of the 2nd century BCE, the Seleucid realm had become a shadow of its former self. The once mighty eastern provinces were now under Parthian control, the west fragmented among independent rulers, and the south lost to Egyptian and Jewish autonomy. The central administration, burdened by debt and intrigue, could no longer maintain the network of cities and garrisons that had once held the empire together. Yet, even in decline, the Seleucid world retained a remarkable legacy. The cities founded by Seleucus the Victorious and his successors continued to thrive as centers of trade, culture, and learning. Greek remained the language of administration from Syria to Mesopotamia, and Hellenistic institutions endured long after the monarchy weakened. The fusion of Greek and Eastern traditions that had characterized the early Seleucid centuries persisted, influencing the Parthians, Romans, and later Byzantine rulers. By the middle of the 2nd century BCE, the Seleucid Empire had become a weakened giant, its western borders insecure, its finances strained, and its royal house torn apart by internal strife. The once vast dominion stretching from the Aegean to the Indus had fractured into competing territories ruled by local dynasts, usurpers, and satraps who owed only nominal allegiance to Antioch. Yet while the empire's kings fought one another for control of Syria, a new power was rising in the east. The Parthians, a people who had begun as little more than a rebellious frontier tribe, were now expanding westward, step by steady step, to seize the fertile heartlands of Mesopotamia. Their ascent would not only destroy Seleucid rule in the east, but also create a new imperial order that would dominate the ancient Near East for centuries. The origins of Parthian power dated back to the earlier rebellion led by Arsaces I, nearly a century before. At that time, Parthia had been a small province under Seleucid control, located in the mountainous lands southeast of the Caspian Sea. The Arsacid dynasty that emerged from this revolt had survived by combining cunning diplomacy with an intimate knowledge of the harsh steppe terrain. They were not at first a major threat. Their early kings ruled a modest territory on the margins of the Seleucid world. But by the time of Mithridates I, often called the Great, the situation had changed dramatically. Mithridates I, who ruled in the mid-2nd century BCE, was the true architect of Parthian power, a ruler of vision and military skill. He recognized that the weakening of the Seleucid monarchy offered an unprecedented opportunity. His goal was not merely survival but expansion, westward into the rich Iranian plateau and the Mesopotamian plain that had long served as the center of great empires. He began by consolidating control over the Iranian heartland, subduing neighboring regions such as Hyrcania, Media, and Elam. These campaigns were not simply conquests but deliberate acts of state-building. Mithridates installed loyal governors, reformed taxation, and adopted many elements of Hellenistic administration, blending Greek political culture with Iranian traditions of kingship. By presenting himself as both a Greek-style monarch and a successor to the ancient Achaemenid kings, Mithridates appealed to diverse populations across his growing realm. The Parthian kings understood the value of symbolism. Their coins depicted them in Greek fashion, with diadems and titles such as Basileus Megas, Great King, but their court rituals retained Persian elements, including elaborate ceremonies and royal seclusion. This dual identity allowed them to rule effectively over a culturally mixed empire. While Mithridates strengthened his position, the Seleucid world was collapsing under the weight of its own divisions. After the death of Demetrius I Soter, the empire fell into renewed chaos as rival claimants fought for the throne. Alexander Balas, a pretender backed by Egypt, seized power briefly, only to be overthrown by Demetrius II Nicator. In the west, cities and satraps changed allegiance with each new ruler, while in the east, Seleucid control was more theoretical than real. This disorder offered Mithridates the perfect opportunity to advance. His first major target was Media, a vast region stretching between the Zagros Mountains and the Iranian plateau. The local population, weary of the shifting loyalties of Seleucid governors, welcomed Parthian stability. Once Media fell, Mithridates turned his attention to Babylonia, the ancient land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Babylonia was not only rich in agriculture and trade, but also symbolic. It was the traditional center of Eastern kingship, the seat of cities such as Seleucia on the Tigris and Babylon itself. To rule Babylon was to claim the legacy of Mesopotamian empire. The Parthian invasion of Mesopotamia likely began around the year 141 BCE, when Mithridates crossed the Zagros Mountains with a large army. The Seleucid forces, commanded by Demetrius II, were hastily assembled and poorly coordinated. Years of internal conflict had depleted both the treasury and the manpower of the empire. When the two armies met, the Parthians combined their mobility and superior cavalry tactics to devastating effect. Their mounted archers harassed the slower Seleucid phalanx, while heavily armored cataphracts delivered crushing charges. The Seleucid army was routed, and Demetrius himself was captured. The capture of a reigning Seleucid king was an event of enormous consequence. Mithridates treated his prisoner with calculated magnanimity, housing him in honorable captivity and even marrying him to a Parthian princess. This act served both as a diplomatic gesture and as propaganda, demonstrating that the Parthian monarch could deal with kings as equals or as subordinates. With Demetrius out of the way, Mithridates consolidated his rule over Mesopotamia. He entered Babylon in triumph, where inscriptions from local temples record dedications made in his name. For the first time since the days of Alexander, the center of the Eastern world was under new masters. The fall of Mesopotamia marked a turning point, not only for the Seleucids but for the broader political landscape of the ancient Near East. The Parthian conquest created a new equilibrium that would endure for centuries. The Iranian plateau and the lands of the Tigris and Euphrates would henceforth form the core of a distinct Eastern empire, independent of the Mediterranean world. The Seleucid capital at Antioch remained in Syria, but the economic and cultural axis of power had shifted decisively away from it. In the aftermath of Demetrius's capture, the Seleucid throne passed to Antiochus VII Sidetes, brother of the imprisoned king. Antiochus VII was an able and determined ruler who sought to reverse his family's fortunes. His first task was to restore order in the western provinces, still torn by rival factions and local uprisings. Once this was achieved, he turned eastward, determined to reclaim the lands lost to Parthia and avenge his brother's defeat. Around the year 130 BCE, Antiochus VII launched a grand campaign of reconquest. He assembled one of the largest armies the Seleucid state had fielded in decades, drawing troops from Syria, Asia Minor, and even Jewish auxiliaries under the leadership of John Hyrcanus, the Hasmonean ruler of Judea. Marching through Mesopotamia, he achieved a series of impressive victories. Cities like Seleucia, Babylon, and Susa opened their gates to him. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the Seleucid Empire might reclaim its eastern provinces. But Antiochus's success was short-lived. The Parthians, skilled in attritional warfare, avoided direct confrontation, retreating into the vast Iranian plateau and cutting off his supply lines. As the Seleucid army advanced deeper into Parthian territory, it found itself isolated, far from its bases and dependent on unreliable local allies. During the harsh winter that followed, famine and desertion weakened the troops. The Parthians, led by Phraates II, launched a surprise counterattack. Antiochus was killed in battle and much of his army was destroyed. The remnants of Seleucid authority in the east disintegrated almost overnight. After Antiochus VII's death, the Seleucid Empire was permanently reduced to Syria and parts of Anatolia. Mesopotamia, Media, and Persia became the heartlands of the Parthian Empire, which now stretched from the Indus to the Euphrates. The Arsacid kings established their new capital at Ctesiphon near the ruins of Seleucia, symbolically supplanting their former overlords. Under their rule, Mesopotamia entered a new phase of prosperity and cultural synthesis. Greek cities continued to thrive, and Greek remained a language of administration and commerce for generations. But the political center had shifted to Iranian nobility and Parthian traditions. The Parthians proved adept at balancing the legacy of the Hellenistic world with their own heritage. They adopted Greek art and architecture while maintaining Iranian court rituals and Zoroastrian religious customs. Their empire became a bridge between East and West, linking the Mediterranean with Central Asia along the trade routes that would later be known as the Silk Road. Yet their success also underscored the failure of Seleucid universalism. The dream of an empire uniting Greek and Persian worlds under one dynasty had ended. For the Seleucids, the loss of Mesopotamia was more than territorial. It was existential. Without the revenue and manpower of the eastern provinces, the empire's economic base collapsed. The once bustling royal cities of Seleucia and Babylon, though still inhabited, were no longer centers of power. The Seleucid kings who followed ruled little more than Syria, occasionally extending their authority into parts of Cilicia or northern Palestine. Their politics became increasingly entangled with those of neighboring powers, Egypt, Armenia, and eventually Rome. Nevertheless, the cultural achievements of the Seleucid centuries continued to influence the Parthian world. The urban networks they had established, Antioch, Seleucia, and Dura Europos among them, remained active hubs of trade and learning. Hellenistic art, philosophy, and science persisted alongside Iranian traditions, creating one of the most cosmopolitan societies of the ancient world. In this sense, even in defeat, the Seleucid legacy endured. The rise of Parthia and the fall of Mesopotamia signaled a profound transformation of the Near Eastern order. The ancient pattern of empire centered on the Tigris and Euphrates had survived, but its rulers had changed. The Seleucid kings, heirs to Alexander's vision, had sought to bridge the worlds of Greece and Asia through culture and conquest. The Parthians, pragmatic and enduring, replaced that ambition with a model of decentralized power, rooted in aristocratic alliances and local autonomy. Their empire would prove far more durable, resisting both Roman invasion and internal division for centuries. By the close of the 2nd century BCE, the Seleucid Empire had been reduced from a sprawling superstate to a fragile kingdom confined largely to Syria and parts of western Mesopotamia. The eastern provinces were now under Parthian rule. The once profitable coastal regions of Asia Minor had fallen to independent powers like Pergamon, and Judea had won de facto autonomy under the Hasmonean dynasty. Yet, the greatest danger to the Seleucid monarchy was not foreign conquest, but internal division. The royal house, weakened by generations of civil strife, now collapsed under the weight of its own rivalries. Usurpers, ambitious generals, and powerful queens fought for the remnants of an empire that had once stretched from the Aegean to India. The following decades would see the dynasty devour itself in a relentless struggle for the Syrian throne. The death of Antiochus VII Sedites in battle against the Parthians had left the Seleucid realm leaderless and demoralized. His brother, Demetrius II Nicator, who had earlier been captured by the Parthians, was briefly released and restored to the throne. But his rule was short and troubled. The years of captivity had eroded his authority, and the nobles who once served him now saw an opportunity to advance their own power. The Parthians, ever skillful in exploiting divisions among their rivals, supported competing claimants to ensure that no strong monarch could re-emerge in Syria. Among the most disruptive of these claimants was a certain Alexander Sabinus, a man of obscure origin who claimed to be an adopted son of Antiochus VII. His claim was almost certainly false, but it was convenient for his backers, chiefly Ptolemy VIII Physcon of Egypt, who sought to weaken Seleucid influence on his northern frontier. With Egyptian gold and mercenaries at his disposal, Alexander invaded Syria, defeating Demetrius in battle. The legitimate king was forced to flee, captured and executed, leaving the throne in the hands of a pretender. Alexander's victory, however, brought no peace. His dependence on Egyptian support made him deeply unpopular among the Syrian elites, who viewed him as a foreign puppet. His rule degenerated into excess and plunder, and within a few years, the nobility turned against him. In this moment of crisis, a new contender appeared. Cleopatra Thea, the widow of Demetrius II, and a remarkable figure whose political acumen rivaled that of any of her male counterparts. Cleopatra Thea was both a daughter of the Ptolemaic royal house and a queen of the Seleucid dynasty, a living embodiment of the two great Hellenistic powers' entangled fates. Having survived multiple political upheavals, she emerged as one of the most capable and ruthless players in the late Seleucid drama. When Alexander Sabinus's rule began to collapse, Cleopatra aligned herself with her son Antiochus VIII Grypus, the hook-nosed, and together they defeated the usurper. Sabinus fled and was killed, reportedly while rummaging through a temple treasury in a desperate attempt to raise funds. With the restoration of her family to the throne, Cleopatra Thea assumed unprecedented authority. For a time, she ruled jointly with her son, her name appearing alongside his on official documents and coins. But their partnership was uneasy. Like many Seleucid monarchs before them, mother and son soon became rivals for power. Cleopatra distrusted Grypus and sought to control him through court factions, while Grypus, eager to assert his independence, built his own base of support among the aristocracy. According to later accounts, Cleopatra attempted to poison him, only to be forced by her son to drink the fatal cup herself. Whether this story is fact or propaganda, it captures the lethal nature of Seleucid politics in this period. Even within the royal household, betrayal had become routine. The death of Cleopatra Thea did not end the dynasty's turmoil. Antiochus VIII faced an immediate challenge from his half-brother Antiochus IX Cyzicenus, another son of Cleopatra by her earlier husband Antiochus VII. The rivalry between these two brothers plunged the kingdom into a civil war that would last nearly 2 decades. Syria, already exhausted by years of instability, was split between their supporters. Each brother established his own capital, Antiochus VIII in Antioch and Antiochus IX in Damascus, and each minted coins, appointed governors, and claimed to be the legitimate ruler of the Seleucid Empire. The conflict between the two Antiochuses epitomized the fragmentation of the once mighty Seleucid realm. Their war was not merely a dynastic feud, but a symptom of deeper structural decay. The central administration, which had once governed an empire through a network of satrapies, now barely controlled the territory around its own capital. Cities like Apamea, Seleucia Pieria, and Laodicea shifted allegiance repeatedly, aligning with whichever claimant seemed stronger at the moment. Local militias, mercenary armies, and foreign allies filled the void left by a collapsing royal army. The brothers' conflict also drew in neighboring powers, each eager to exploit Seleucid weakness. The Ptolemies of Egypt, the Nabateans of Arabia, and the Parthians all intervened at various points, offering support or refuge to rival claimants. Even the Hasmoneans of Judea took advantage of the chaos to expand their territory northward. The Seleucid king, who had once commanded armies across 3 continents, was now reduced to negotiating with local rulers to maintain a foothold in Syria. The civil war reached new depths of tragedy when Antiochus IX was killed in battle, only for his son, Antiochus X Eusebius, to continue the conflict against his cousin, Antiochus VIII's sons. The once unified dynasty had fractured into competing branches, each ruling a fragment of what had been the greatest empire of the Hellenistic world. These incessant wars drained the kingdom's resources, depopulated its cities, and eroded its institutions. Meanwhile, the surrounding world was changing. In the north, the kingdom of Armenia, under its ambitious king Tigranes the Great, was rising to prominence. Tigranes had once been a Parthian vassal, but, as the Seleucids declined, he built a powerful state that soon threatened to eclipse them entirely. In the west, Roman influence continued to expand. Following its conquest of Macedonia and the destruction of Corinth, Rome had become the supreme power in the Greek world, and its presence in Asia Minor grew stronger with each passing decade. The Seleucids, who had once contested Rome's expansion, now depended on Roman favor to settle their internal disputes. After years of internecine war, a brief period of stability returned under Antiochus X Eusebius, who managed to reunite much of Syria and restore some semblance of order. He married Cleopatra Selene, the daughter of Cleopatra Thea, uniting rival branches of the family. Yet his reign, too, was short-lived. The growing power of Armenia soon engulfed the weakened Seleucid kingdom. Around the year 83 BCE, Tigranes the Great invaded Syria, capturing Antioch and incorporating the region into his expanding empire. For nearly 2 decades, Armenia ruled over what had once been the Seleucid heartland, and the heirs of Seleucus became exiles in their own land. When Roman forces under Lucius Licinius Lucullus later defeated Tigranes during the Mithridatic Wars, Syria once again changed hands. A few surviving members of the Seleucid royal line attempted to reclaim the throne, but by now their kingdom existed only on paper. The most prominent of these was Antiochus XIII Asiaticus, who ruled briefly under Roman supervision. His authority extended little beyond the city of Antioch, and his reign represented not revival but dependency. Throughout this final phase of Seleucid history, one theme remained constant: the fragmentation of authority. The dynasty that had once ruled as heirs of Alexander now resembled a collection of feuding noble houses, each clinging to its ancestral claims. The grand vision of a unified empire stretching across continents had vanished. In its place stood a weary realm divided by lineage, loyalty, and geography. The late Seleucid civil wars also reflected a broader transformation of the eastern Mediterranean world. The age of the Hellenistic kingdoms was ending. The Ptolemies in Egypt were themselves in decline, their power corroded by Roman interference and domestic weakness. The Antigonids of Macedon had long since been destroyed. The rise of Rome and Parthia had created a new geopolitical order, leaving little room for the once great dynasties of Alexander's successors. Yet even in these twilight years, the Seleucid legacy endured. The cities founded by their ancestors continued to flourish as centers of culture and trade. Antioch remained a metropolis of the ancient world, its streets filled with merchants, philosophers, and artisans. The Seleucid system of administration, coinage, and city organization influenced both Roman provincial government and Parthian imperial structures. The cultural fusion of Greek and Eastern traditions that had begun under Seleucus the Victorious lived on, even as the dynasty itself faded into history. By the early decades of the 1st century BCE, the Seleucid Empire, once a vast dominion stretching across 3 continents, had dwindled into a narrow strip of land centered on Syria. Its surviving kings ruled little more than the cities of Antioch, Damascus, and a few surrounding territories. The old imperial capital of Seleucia on the Tigris had long fallen under Parthian control, and the wealthy provinces of Mesopotamia, Persia, and Media were lost forever. The age of conquest, reform, and grand diplomacy that had defined the early Seleucid monarchs had given way to an age of survival. In these final years, the dynasty's story became one of diminished horizons, a slow struggle to maintain legitimacy in a world increasingly dominated by larger powers, Armenia in the east and Rome in the west. The last phase of Seleucid history began with the aftermath of the civil wars that had torn the kingdom apart in the 2nd century BCE. When Tigranes the Great of Armenia invaded Syria around the year 83 BCE, the once independent Seleucid monarchs were reduced to exiles. Tigranes, at the height of his power, ruled an empire that extended from the Caucasus to Palestine, encompassing territories that had once belonged to the Seleucids. His court in Tigranokerta became a center of Hellenistic and Armenian culture, filled with Greek artists and scholars taken as captives from Syria's cities. For nearly 20 years, the Seleucid dynasty disappeared from the political map, its remnants surviving only in memory. The turning point came with the intervention of Rome. During the great conflicts known as the Mithridatic Wars, Rome waged campaigns against Mithridates, the 6th Eupator of Pontus, Tigranes' ally and son-in-law. The Roman general Lucius Licinius Lucullus, marching east from Asia Minor, defeated the Armenian forces and captured Tigranocerta. In the wake of these victories, Rome sought to dismantle the power of both Mithridates and Tigranes, and in doing so, it resurrected the Seleucid name, though only as a convenient political tool. Among the few surviving members of the dynasty was Antiochus XIII Asiaticus, a descendant of the earlier kings. Installed as a client ruler under Roman oversight, Antiochus governed what little remained of the Seleucid realm, essentially the city of Antioch and parts of coastal Syria. His reign, however, was less that of an independent monarch and more that of a caretaker. The real authority in the region lay with Rome, whose generals and envoys dictated policy. The Seleucid crown, once a symbol of universal kingship, had become a token of local administration. Antiochus XIII's rule unfolded in a world transformed. The Mediterranean basin was now the stage of Roman expansion. The old Hellenistic kingdoms, the Antigonid, the Ptolemaic, and the Seleucid, had either been conquered or reduced to dependencies. In Asia Minor, Rome had absorbed Pergamon and Bithynia. In the east, Parthia had consolidated its power. And in the south, the last of the Ptolemies in Egypt ruled under Roman protection. The Seleucid kingdom, hemmed in on all sides, survived only through the forbearance of others. Even in this diminished state, however, Syria retained immense strategic importance. It lay at the crossroads of trade routes connecting the Mediterranean with Mesopotamia and Arabia, Control of Syria meant control of wealth flowing between east and west. For Rome, the region served as both a buffer against Parthia and a bridge to Egypt. Yet the Seleucid rulers proved incapable of providing the stability Rome required. Civil disorder, economic hardship, and rivalry among local factions made effective governance impossible. The death of Antiochus III around the mid-60s BCE marked the final unraveling of Seleucid authority. His end was as ignoble as his kingdom's decline. Contemporary sources suggest that he was assassinated, possibly at the instigation of his own officials, though the details remain uncertain. His death left Syria without a recognized ruler, and competing local leaders vied for control. Among them was Philip II Philomeus, another Seleucid prince who attempted to claim the throne with Roman support. But his authority was even weaker than that of his predecessor, confined to small territories and dependent entirely on foreign patrons. At this moment, the Roman general Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, better known as Pompey the Great, entered the scene. Pompey had just completed a series of campaigns in the east, defeating the remnants of Mithridates' forces and reorganizing the provinces of Asia Minor. His arrival in Syria in the year 64 BCE marked the definitive end of the Seleucid dynasty. Seeing the chaos and instability that plagued the region, Pompey declared Syria a Roman province, arguing that the local rulers were incapable of maintaining order. In truth, this annexation was the culmination of a long process of Roman intervention and influence that had begun more than half a century earlier. With a stroke of imperial administration, the Seleucid monarchy, founded more than 250 years earlier by Seleucus I Nicator, one of Alexander's greatest generals, ceased to exist. The cities that had once formed the backbone of the empire, Antioch, Laodicea, Apamea, and Seleucia Pieria, became centers of Roman provincial governance. The great capital of Antioch, with its broad colonnaded streets and Hellenistic theaters, was transformed into the seat of the Roman governor. Roman legions were stationed there, and the city gradually became one of the most important urban centers of the Eastern Empire, second only to Alexandria in wealth and population. The end of Seleucid rule did not mean the disappearance of its culture or institutions. In many respects, Rome inherited and adapted the administrative and urban framework the Seleucids had built. The network of cities founded by the Seleucid kings remained intact, serving as nodes of commerce and culture throughout the Roman and later Byzantine periods. Greek continued to be the language of administration, education, and trade, while local traditions and religions persisted alongside Greco-Roman practices. The fusion of cultures that had defined the Seleucid world endured under new masters, demonstrating that while empires may fall, the societies they create often outlast them. In retrospect, the Seleucid collapse was the result of long-term structural weaknesses as much as external pressures. The empire's sheer size had always been both its strength and its vulnerability. Holding together territories stretching from the Mediterranean to Central Asia required not only military power but constant personal leadership from the king, a task few successors could sustain. The early Seleucids had relied on a careful balance of Greek and local elites, but over time this equilibrium eroded. The dynasty's chronic internal conflicts, compounded by the growing involvement of foreign powers such as Rome and Egypt, undermined any chance of lasting stability. The later Seleucid kings, ruling a shrunken state, faced an impossible task. They lacked the resources to challenge Rome or Parthia, yet they also lacked the legitimacy to govern effectively at home. Their attempts to play one power against another only hastened their downfall. When Pompey annexed Syria, there was no great battle, no dramatic siege, and no final stand. The Seleucid kingdom simply dissolved, its people already accustomed to the authority of foreign commanders, its cities ready to welcome a new order. Yet the Seleucid legacy was profound. In the centuries that followed, Roman and Parthian rulers alike drew upon the political and cultural foundations laid by the Seleucids. The Parthians, who had conquered the eastern provinces, adopted elements of Hellenistic administration and art. Their successors, the Sasanian Persians, inherited many of the same traditions. In the West, the Romans incorporated Seleucid urban models into their provincial systems, blending them with their own methods of governance. The cities of Syria remained vibrant centers of intellectual and commercial life well into late antiquity, producing philosophers, theologians, and scientists whose influence reached far beyond their region. The Seleucid experiment, the attempt to govern a multi-ethnic transcontinental empire through a synthesis of Greek and Eastern institutions, stands as one of the most ambitious political projects of the ancient world. Though it ultimately failed to sustain itself, it succeeded in reshaping the cultural geography of the Near East. Greek became the lingua franca of the region. Urban life flourished in ways unseen since the Achaemenid era, and the interaction between East and West laid the groundwork for the later Hellenistic and Roman civilizations. When the last Seleucid king, Antiochus III Asiaticus, was deposed and Syria was annexed by Pompey the Great in the year 64 BCE, the dynasty that had once ruled from the Aegean to the Indus vanished from the stage of history. Yet the end of the Seleucid line was not the end of its influence. The empire's physical and cultural foundations, its cities, institutions, and ideas of governance, endured for centuries under new masters. In many ways, the Parthian and Roman worlds inherited a Seleucid landscape, both literally and intellectually. The network of cities they had built, the administrative practices they had established, and the cosmopolitan culture they had fostered became the framework upon which later empires would construct their own systems of power. The Seleucids may have fallen, but the world they created continued to thrive long after their last king was gone. The most visible legacy of the Seleucids was urban. From its inception, the empire had been built around a network of cities, planned, fortified, and economically integrated into the fabric of imperial administration. These foundations were more than garrisons or settlements. They were instruments of civilization and control. When Seleucus I Nicator had begun founding cities across his vast domains, he was not merely establishing colonies for veterans. He was creating a new urban geography that linked the Greek world to the older civilizations of the Near East. By the time of the empire's dissolution, hundreds of Hellenistic cities dotted its former territories. Among these, Antioch on the Orontes and Seleucia on the Tigris stood as twin capitals, one facing west toward the Mediterranean, the other east toward Mesopotamia. Antioch, founded near the Mediterranean coast, became the beating heart of Hellenistic Syria. Its wide colonnaded streets, bustling markets, and monumental temples reflected the wealth and sophistication of a cosmopolitan metropolis. Under Roman rule, Antioch retained its prominence, serving as the administrative capital of the province of Syria and as the primary residence of the Roman governor of the East. It grew into one of the great cities of the ancient world, rivaled only by Alexandria and later by Constantinople. The Romans themselves admired its organization and beauty. Its blend of Greek design and Eastern vitality became a model for urban development across the Eastern Mediterranean. Seleucia on the Tigris, though lost to Parthian control long before the final collapse of the dynasty, retained its importance well into the Parthian and early Sasanian periods. Even after it was gradually overshadowed by the Parthian royal capital at Ctesiphon, Seleucia remained a vital commercial hub linking Mesopotamia with the Persian Gulf and Central Asia. Archaeological remains reveal a city of grand avenues, public squares, and monumental architecture, testimony to the enduring power of the Seleucid urban vision. The twin cities of Seleucia and Ctesiphon would together form one of the great metropolises of the ancient world, serving as the eastern counterpart to Rome. Beyond these capitals, other Seleucid foundations flourished under new rulers. Laodicea, Apamea, and Edessa continued as centers of regional trade and administration, their Greek civic institutions adapted to new political realities. In the east, cities such as Ai-Khanoum in Bactria preserved Hellenistic artistic and philosophical traditions long after the Seleucids had lost control. Even in distant Parthia, cities founded under Seleucid rule retained Greek theaters, gymnasia, and temples, a lasting imprint of the cultural synthesis that the dynasty had promoted. The Seleucid contribution to urban life went far beyond architecture. Their cities were laboratories of cultural exchange where Greek settlers, local artisans, and Eastern merchants interacted daily. They created a shared civic identity that transcended ethnic divisions, uniting diverse populations under the idea of the polis. In these urban centers, Greek language and education flourished, but so too did older Mesopotamian, Persian, and Semitic traditions. Over time, this mixture produced a uniquely Hellenistic culture, rational yet spiritual, cosmopolitan yet local, that would profoundly influence both Roman and Parthian civilization. Administratively, the Seleucid Empire left an equally enduring mark. The Seleucid kings had inherited from the Achaemenid Persians a system of satrapies, large provinces governed by appointed officials, but they reshaped this structure to suit a more Hellenistic framework. They introduced councils, assemblies, and local magistrates, blending Greek civic institutions with Persian administrative efficiency. Taxation was regularized, and trade routes were secured by a combination of royal oversight and municipal autonomy. When the Romans annexed Syria, they largely preserved these administrative divisions, finding them well suited to provincial governance. In this sense, the Seleucid Empire served as a bridge between the Persian and Roman worlds, a conduit through which imperial practices evolved from the east to the west. Economically, the Seleucid territories had been among the richest in the ancient world. The empire's location between the Mediterranean and the Iranian plateau made it a central artery of global commerce. Goods from India, Central Asia, and Arabia flowed westward through its markets, while Greek and Mediterranean products traveled east. This exchange created what might be called the first truly interconnected Eurasian economy. When the Parthians succeeded the Seleucids in the east, they maintained many of the same trade networks, including the caravan routes that would later form part of the Silk Road. The Seleucid contribution to this system was not only infrastructural but conceptual. They viewed their empire as a space of movement, exchange, and synthesis. Culturally and intellectually, the Seleucid world left an indelible imprint on the civilizations that followed. Their policy of fostering Greek language and education created a lasting Hellenistic identity across the Near East. Greek became the lingua franca of commerce, scholarship, and diplomacy from Anatolia to the Indus, a status it would retain throughout the Roman and Byzantine periods. The Seleucid emphasis on cultural pluralism, while often politically motivated, allowed for unprecedented artistic and intellectual experimentation. In cities like Antioch and Seleucia, philosophers discussed Aristotle and Plato alongside Babylonian astrology and Zoroastrian cosmology. Artists blended Greek realism with Oriental symbolism, producing hybrid styles visible in sculpture, pottery, and coinage. This fusion extended to religion as well. The Seleucid kings, inheriting both the divine kingship of Persia and the civic cults of Greece, encouraged syncretism. Local gods were identified with Greek deities, Zeus with Baal, Apollo with Shamash, and Athena with Ishtar, creating a shared pantheon that transcended borders. This religious blending paved the way for later cultural syntheses under Rome, and even for the spiritual diversity that characterized late antiquity. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Seleucid legacy was the persistence of their urban institutions under Roman rule. Antioch, for example, retained its Greek-style council and magistrates even as it became a Roman provincial capital. The city's citizens continued to think of themselves as heirs to a Greek civic tradition while also serving as subjects of the Roman state. The coexistence of local autonomy within imperial oversight, a hallmark of Roman provincial administration, was in many ways a Seleucid inheritance. The Parthians, though often seen as cultural opponents of the Hellenistic world, also absorbed much from the Seleucid model. Their adoption of Greek language on coinage, their maintenance of Greek-style cities in Mesopotamia, and their tolerance for multicultural governance all reflected Seleucid precedents. Even the later Sasanian Persians, who prided themselves on reviving pure Iranian traditions, could not entirely erase the Hellenistic imprint. Their cities, art, and administrative systems all bore traces of Seleucid foundations. The Seleucid world also shaped the religious and intellectual environment in which early Christianity would later emerge. Antioch, the jewel of the former Seleucid realm, became one of the first centers of the Christian movement and a key hub of theological debate in late antiquity. The cosmopolitan character of the city, its mixture of Greek rationalism, Semitic spirituality, and Persian mysticism, made it fertile ground for new religious ideas. The very infrastructure that the Seleucids had built to unify their empire, roads, trade routes, and urban centers, now served as the conduits for cultural and spiritual transformation under Rome. Despite the dynasty's political demise, the Seleucid vision of empire as a bridge between East and West continued to resonate. They had sought not merely to rule diverse peoples, but to integrate them into a shared world through culture, economy, and administration. Their empire was the first in history to attempt a truly transcontinental synthesis of Greek and Asian civilizations. Though it ultimately failed to maintain political cohesion, its cultural and intellectual legacy proved more enduring than any conquest. The Seleucids' fall also offered lessons that would be heeded by future empires. Both Rome and Parthia recognized the dangers of overextension and internal division that had undone the Seleucid state. Each in its own way adopted a more flexible system of provincial governance, allowing for local autonomy under imperial oversight, a principle first tested under the Seleucid kings. Their history thus became not merely a cautionary tale of decline, but a model for adaptation. In the end, the Seleucid Empire stands as one of antiquity's great experiments in empire building. Born from the chaos following Alexander's death, it sought to merge Greek ambition with Eastern endurance, rational administration with royal majesty. Its rulers were at once conquerors and patrons, soldiers and city builders, inheritors of Alexander's vision and precursors to Rome's. The empire's collapse under internal and external pressures did not erase its achievements. Rather, it ensured that those achievements would be absorbed and reinterpreted by those who came after. When later generations walked through the streets of Antioch or studied in the academies of Seleucia, they did so within the living memory of Seleucid achievement. The empire that had once united East and West left behind more than ruins. It left a template for empire itself. In its vast reach, cultural fusion, and administrative sophistication, the Seleucid experiment prefigured the later global empires of history. Its end marked not a disappearance but a transformation, as its legacy flowed onward through Rome, Parthia, Byzantium, and beyond, an unbroken thread connecting the worlds that Alexander had first sought to join. And thus, from the ashes of the Seleucid realm, rose a world that was unmistakably its own creation. A world where Greek and Eastern traditions mingled, where the idea of universal empire endured, and where the name of Seleucus, though forgotten by many, lived on in the very cities, languages, and cultures that had once formed the heart of his empire.